Good morning, everybody. I hope you've had some time to settle in. Welcome to the European Parliament. Welcome to Brussels. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity in this very hectic week, which is the last week before Christmas for us here in Brussels. Next week we're in Strasbourg. But I'm really grateful we can have a discussion on what I think is a key topic, communicating with people in the Middle East, how democratic values are growing from the bottom up, or how they can be shared worldwide in these hyper-connected times. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marietje Schaake. I've been a member of the European Parliament since 2009. I represent the Progressive Liberal Party from the Netherlands. We're called Democrat 66, and we sit in the Liberal family here in the European Parliament. My work focuses mostly on the EU in the world, both in terms of foreign policy and human rights, as well as in international trade relations. And the role of technology has always taken a central role in my work. We're in the process of setting up a cross-party, cross-national group of members here in the House. It's called an intergroup for the digital agenda. So we work to set the agenda and to look at how technologies change our societies and, of course, push for that to be positive change, but not shy away from the challenges. I've been quite involved with the changes in North Africa and the Middle East that have taken place over the last couple of years, and have looked in greater detail at how digital technologies should be an integral part in the EU's foreign and security policy, in a report that deals with digital freedoms as part of the EU's foreign and security policy. I also initiated a report on press and media freedom in the world and the role that the EU can play to take a lead in advancing it, building local capacity and protecting the role of journalists. And in my work, it has not been difficult to spot the many challenges that people face all over the world. If you look at journalists, bloggers, they're really in the front line of the fight for freedom. They're often attacked, sometimes killed, intimidated, imprisoned, sued. And I think it is really important that we recognize the essential value of media independence, media freedom, and the role of journalists. We've also noticed real changes in how people all over the world, especially in repressive societies, can now, with the help of new technologies, access information and find a platform to raise their voices themselves. But of course, precisely this empowerment of individuals has often frightened their governments and their leaders, and has also led to new challenges. The ability through new technologies to more cheaply and fastly acquire mass surveillance technology, intrusion technology to hack into people's devices has targeted journalists more than anyone else. Tracking and tracing human rights defenders and censoring or altering information is really now becoming standard practice in too many places, especially in North Africa and the Middle East. There have been many attempts, I think, to look at how open societies could use the new technologies, media in general, to reach people or to make their voices heard in our own societies. The question is probably adequate this morning: what real impact has it had? On the one hand, for example, we saw an ambitious internet freedom agenda from the United States, while at the same time the revelations of the NSA practices show that mass surveillance was also fostered, and some of the most sophisticated tools, such as encryption, that could keep people and their communications safe, were actually undermined in this context. In the EU, we've seen systematic budget cuts of media organizations, including the ones that work abroad. And the question is, has it led to new initiatives, or has it really only eroded the space for free journalism? I've been quite disappointed oftentimes in the gap between what I think Europe should have done in response to the uprisings in North Africa and the Middle East, in recognizing the enormous power of a new generation of people that seek a more just and free and prosperous society. I think we should have really embraced the momentum of transition with much more ambition, including advancing the situation of journalists, bloggers, and media organizations. But as we embark on a new legislature here in the EU with a new High Representative, a new European Parliament, perhaps this is also a moment to set the agenda. So I hope this morning we can look at concrete solutions, concrete ways forward, policy recommendations that we can then share with Silvio Gonzato, who is actually the director of the Human Rights and Democracy Department at the European External Action Service. And of course, the recommendations will be passed on in this Parliament too, and to those for whom it's relevant. So I would invite you all to be solution-oriented in your thinking. It is important to look at what we've learned. And I'm very, very happy with all the distinguished speakers that we have this morning. It's a real honor and pleasure to have you all here. Before I'll talk about what the panels will deal with, a few remarks. There will be coffee coming to you in the middle of the morning, so you don't have to leave the room to find it. We'll make sure you get your caffeine. There are people filming this, and it is also absolutely fine to share some of your thoughts on social media, but be aware that this is an on-the-record and open discussion. Everybody is welcome, and just before you speak, just be aware of that in case of any sensitivities. The morning is going to be quite a long one, but we will not make you listen the whole time. We really want this to be interactive because there are many distinguished experts in the room as much as there are here on the podium. So the first panel is going to zoom in on the challenges of working with audiences in the Middle East, perhaps with the realities in North Africa and the Middle East, and what we should learn from that, why it is difficult to run media organizations, and perhaps what the EU and other international community members have done that has not worked or that has been difficult. Taking those lessons and looking at solutions, we will go into the second panel, which will be introduced when they're about to speak. Then Mr. Ahi will wrap up and look at next steps before Silvio Gonzato will say some closing remarks. So again, it's going to be an ambitious program this morning, and I look forward to being a part of those discussions. I will step aside at some point and let Shahriar Ahi do the moderation, but not before introducing the first speakers, who will then speak for about 7 to 10 minutes with their introductions, and then we'll turn to you. First, I would like to give the floor to Nabin Mounla, who is the former chairman and CEO of Future TV in Lebanon. He has held many advisory positions, both to government and as a CEO, vice chairman of the Beirut Stock Exchange. Then we'll hear from Armand Mostofi, who is the director at Radio Farda. He has graduated in journalism from the University of Tehran and has worked as a director of Radio Farda since 2011. It is the Iranian service, the Persian language service of Radio Free Europe. And then last but not least in the first panel, Maher Hamoud. He is the former editor-in-chief of the Daily News in Egypt. It was the only English language independent newspaper. It is the only independent daily newspaper in English in Egypt, and he is now a member of the Middle East and North Africa Research Group at Ghent University here close by in Belgium. We're very happy to have him and to hear all of your introductory remarks. May I give you the floor first?
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I hope that I will be able to contribute to a better understanding of the subject and to the formulation of policies that will follow the discussion. 12 years ago, post-September 11, 2001, the Americans asked, "Why do Arabs and Muslims hate us?" Their immediate response was, "They don't know us. They just don't know the United States of America. They simply don't understand us." As a result, they devised a massive media campaign under the management of Mrs. Charlotte Beers, Under-Secretary of State. Scholars, officials, and Arab audience all agreed that the campaign was a big failure, a flop. It's my objective to present this case study as a lesson on what went wrong, what not to do, and to avoid similar mistakes in formulating policies needed to address our topic, communicating democratic values in the Middle East. When Secretary of State Colin Powell introduced Under Secretary Beers, he said, "I wanted one of the world's greatest advertising experts, because what are we doing? We are selling a product. That product we are selling is democracy. It's the free enterprise system. It's the American value system. It's a product very much in demand. It's a product very much needed. It's our job to be salespersons, and one of the best tools we are going to have is the internet, web design, that is net diplomacy. It's vital that we do it well. It's vital we do it right." Immediately after September 11th, Mrs. Beers launched a campaign composed of 4 commercials to demonstrate that the war is not against Islam, it's against terrorists and those who support and harbor them. The 4 commercials showed Muslim Americans going about their daily lives. Actors in the program talked of tolerance and religious freedom. The campaign was supposed to be aired during the month of Ramadan, and several countries refused to air them, claiming that the material is government-sponsored propaganda. At that time, we at Future Television had a 2-hour panel discussion on the campaign with the participation of some of the actors in the commercials, and carried an on-air live survey on the effectiveness of the commercials. A copy, actually, of a DVD of the panel and the survey and the commercials will be given to the Secretariat for the fight. What were the results? 93% of those who participated in the survey felt the campaign is ineffective. The main reason cited for the ineffectiveness was the foreign policy of the United States of America, the double standard in their policy. Freedom, democracy, and nonviolence in the United States, and injustice, hegemony, hypocrisy, and its bully approach to international relations. The problem is not how Muslims are treated in the United States, but how Muslims and Arabs are treated in their own countries. As one Arab student in the USA put it, and I quote, "So far, as a recent student in America, I have only had wonderful experiences in this country. I, as an Arab, have been treated with the utmost respect by every single American. But to the other dark side of America, I have also been a witness. In the Middle East, I have seen, together with hundreds of millions of people, the destructive nature of its foreign agenda." He added, "Muslims and Arabs know that America is a great place to live. They just do not understand why they are oppressed by her and her clients on their land." A panel that included former Under Secretary of State Mr. Jared Jan, and which evaluated the campaign, indicated in their report, quote, "It's how to reconcile the difference in perceived American values and the reality of American foreign policy." A professor at Fletcher School at Tufts University wrote, "No amount of media management will matter if the US is not also seen and actually working on ways to resolve some of the conflicts which have served to feed fanaticism and anti-US sentiment throughout many Arab and Islamic nations." Other media ventures with a budget of a few $100 million, such as Al Hurra TV and Sawa Radio, funded by the US government and broadcasting to the Middle East, were equally ineffective. Did the approach change with Mr. Obama? No. On the contrary, it's a period filled with false promises and hopes. In 2009, both in Cairo and Ankara, Turkey, Mr. Obama dazzled the Arabs and the Muslim world with a big PR stunt. Allow me to remind you of some statements he made that are very indicative. The first one said, quote, "History is often tragic, but unresolved it can be a heavy weight." Another quote, "America's relationship with the Muslim community, the Muslim world, cannot and will not just be based upon opposition to terrorism. We seek broader engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect. A third quote, the choices that we make in the coming years will determine whether the future will be shaped by fear or by freedom, by poverty or by prosperity, by strife or by a just, secure and lasting peace. The final quotation, and it's on democracy, he said, no system of government can or should be imposed upon one nature by any other. He added, people yearn for certain things, the ability to speak your mind and have a say in how you are governed, confidence in the rule of law and equal administration of justice, government that is transparent and does not steal from the people, the freedom to live as you choose. It's about the human rights. Where is the Arab and the Muslim word from all of this? False promises. We have a proverb in Arabic that is very indicative, and it says, read and you will be happy. Try and you will be sad. Now, can Europe make a difference and be able to play a role in contributing to the spread of democratic values in the Middle East? The answer is yes. Europe, over the past few decades, has been able to accumulate enough goodwill in the Arab and Muslim world, which allows it to be accepted as a communication channel. Initiatives and examples such as the Euromad agreements, the neighborhood initiatives, and Europe's foreign policy and its multidimensional approach puts it in this position. The European goodwill, and we have to recognize there are major challenges currently dominating the Arab world and Muslim world, such as tribal affiliation, political biases, regional affiliations, sectarianism, ethnic differences, and religious conflicts, all should guide us in the formulation of a plan to spread democratic values in the region. The basic guidelines of the plan should be, 1, it should be long-term rather than a short-term crisis management. 2, it has to be multidimensional, that is social, political, media-oriented, economic, and cultural. 3, it should be a two-way communication, not a one-way communication. 4, there should be an inherent consistency between foreign policy and domestic values. And 5, there should be, and here I emphasize this, reliance on the true, vibrant democratic social and political groups in the region. When these groups were left alone and behind, violence and hatred prevailed. I apologize for throwing too many ideas in a short time. I hope that with the discussion that follows, we can highlight some or discuss in full the details. Thank you.
With that brilliant start, we move to Mr. Mostafi.
Thank you, Sharia. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not the expert of the Middle East. I'm just a broadcaster who broadcasts toward Iran. Subject of this seminar is communicating democratic values to the Middle East. It means in itself that in the Middle East there are communities, countries, population that do not have access to democratic values. And they need to be communicated to them from abroad. That's what we are doing. We, I mean, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and in this particular case, Radio Farda, the Iran service of Radio Free Europe. Iran service broadcasts 24/7 in Persian language from Prague to Iran. As a delivery outlet, we use 4 satellites, 1 medium wave transmitter, 15 short wave transmitters, and, of course, Internet. This organization is founded by United States Congress. This is an important point, and if the time permits, I will come back to this point. The degree of reception of the democratic values in the Middle East is not the same. Iran, Pakistan, or I don't know if I can compare Iran with Yemen, have not the same degree of receptivity for democratic values. Even inside the same country, different regions have not the same degree of democratic culture. But as a whole, I think Iranian population has a solid base of reception for democratic values. As a proof, I remind you the huge demonstrations in Tehran in June 2009, where the state sources confirmed that more than 4 million people were in the streets of only Tehran chanting, "Where is my vote?" That was a huge jump in a social conscience of Iranians, and the expansion of the democratic values inside the society, even inside the families. Preventing these people of information is not an easy task. You know, the common point of all dictators, one of the main common points, is their wish to censor the information, to force the people to believe the truth that they wish, their truth, not the impartial truth. These dictators could be from Hitler and Stalin to Kim Jong-un or Khamenei. Principle is the same. In all cases, they try to put obstacles and hampers on the way of free flow of information in any con they can. We in Radio Farda, we do a surrogate journalism. I mean, the journalists working in Radio Farda in Iran service of RFRL think that if they were free to work in Iran, what they could write and say. That's they do from abroad. This is an important point. I will, again, talking about the solution, will return to this point, because that's a big difference between an international Persian-speaking media and a surrogate Iranian media. That's a big difference. What a dictator regime, and in this particular case, the Iranian regime, fears is exactly the free flow of information. They do not like the people to know everything about everything. Obstacles and challenges on our job is in three domains. I can say upstream, downstream, and on journalists themselves. I will make short because time is passing quickly. We cannot have any physical presence. When I say we, I mean Iranian-speaking media broadcasting from abroad. That can be the BBC Persian, VOA Persian, Manoto TV in UK, or Radio Farda. We do not have, and we cannot have, have any physical presence inside the country. We cannot have stringers, reporters. The officials do not answer our calls. And even the people who are not officials, like scholars, journalists, experts, or lawyers, they are warned, they have been warned not to answer our contacts. Even the ordinary people, when they send an SMS message to Radio Farda, they receive automatically a warning from the Ministry of Intelligence. Recently, I got knowledge of existing of an office in Iran. It's very interesting. The office of tracking phone calls to foreign media. To track the phone calls to the foreign media, an office has been created inside the Ministry of Intelligence. So you see the degree of the harassment of the people who work on information. Another challenge is on the delivery. Satellites are jammed. Sometimes even satellite on air in the sky was jammed in 2009, 2010. Now satellite signals are jammed inside the cities. That's a big scandal inside Iran. Our medium wave is jammed, and our internet is filtered. How we do and what we do, that goes to the second panel about the solution. And from our side, Radio Farda's side, Fred Petrosian, the editor-in-chief of our website, is here and will give you information. And worst, the journalists and their families are constantly harassed by Iranian intelligence inside the country and outside the country. Just one example I will give you is that the information about the private life of the journalists have been published on internet, mixed with gossips. So you can imagine how much the journalists and their families will be taken under a psychological pressure. In remaining 1 minute, I will talk about how can Europe effectively reach people. Very shortly, in the United States, governments may change, but they believe in democratic values are unchangeable. United States Congress directly funds the United States international broadcasting, not George Bush government or Barack Obama government. In European Union, there are 28 countries with 28 different policies. Some of them are courageous in this field. Example, Czech Republic hosted RFRL in Prague, Václav Havel, great Václav Havel. And they hosted Radio Farda. On the price of Iran, called back his ambassador. What do other countries? Well, UK has the BBC. BBC for itself is a big institution. I don't know how much can we put the BBC on the account of European Union. It existed long before. Inside the European Union, the big countries like France, Germany, or Netherlands, they financed Persian-speaking radios targeting Iran. But these radios have been reduced recently just to 3 websites. One solution, probably just as a matter of discussion, can be to put this task of defending the democratic values under the responsibility of European Parliament, not member states. If they will do anything, welcome. Why not? But in Europe, you have 28 different policies, but European Parliament has just one policy on the democratic values. If you like or not, in the world of today, there are 2 great poles of democracies, United States and European Union. I will not diminish the importance of democratic values in Canada or New Zealand or Australia, but the main pose of UK and US and EU. Well, in EU, you have Euronews. It's founded by European Commission. But Euronews, even though has a Persian language program, is a European media made for European audience, but broadcast in a dozen of languages. It's not targeted to transfer to communicate democratic values to Middle East. One proposal, you will forgive me for passing the time, can be to put the whole efforts of European Union about the communicating democratic values under the responsibility and supervision, direct supervision of European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mustafi. From the Levant to Iran to Egypt, don't blame us for not being geographically comprehensive. Maher Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Rahi. Thank you, Mr. Rahi. Good morning, everyone. Some of us might consider the acquittal of Mubarak, the failure of state building in Libya, the civil war in Syria, the sectarian clashes in Yemen, or the international silence on and approval of crushing protesters in Bahrain, the death of the Arab Spring. We might also say, lucky Tunisia, the only survivor of such a Shakespearean tragedy. First of all, how short-sighted can we get calling a revolution a spring? As if it's a shopping season. Maybe it is for the media industry and the news commercialization machine. At the end of the day, in the 21st century, a news story has become like any other product. The sexier it gets, the more it sells. Having this said, why don't we even call the Arab revolutions Arab Christmas? Why not if it entertains us and uses us to generate a few extra millions and puts them in the pockets of the world's media production machine? A revolution is not a spring picnic in a park or a summer tan by the beach. A revolution is a very long and complex process of attack and retreat in a very long battle between the new and the old, the revolutionary and the counter-revolutionary, until the values of justice and freedom are institutionally fulfilled. A process that can take years and years while we are still continuing to learn about the very long French Revolution that changed the face of Europe and what went right or wrong in its extended course of development. A revolution cannot be labeled as a success or a failure after a one-season TV show while having popcorn. We can only judge long after the battle is over and the dust is settled. In the wake of the Arab revolutions, the EU in December 2011 launched a program called No Disconnect Strategy in order to protect internet access as a driver of political freedom. Announcing the strategy, the Vice President of the European Commission back then, who was responsible for the digital agenda, Neelie Kroes, said, quote, "In 2011, video sharing services helped expose regime abuse. They made us aware and better able to take action. Repressive regimes now understand the power of these networks and have tried to turn them off. They did not succeed, and the EU is working to ensure online rights are respected like offline rights." End of quote. It is well observed that the EU in the past 10 years launched many programs in support of media freedoms. The Samir Kassir Award, Anna Lindh Foundation's Annual Mediterranean Journalist Award, the Regional Communication Program, and the Program of Media and Culture of Development in the Southern Mediterranean region, among other smaller programs in the field of media freedom and other many big and small programs in the field of human rights. All are facts and actions that show Europe's general interest in seeing values of democracy, freedom of expression, and human rights met and fulfilled. Now, let's leave this general and focus on the details by asking ourselves a very important question. Where is Europe's real position from all what is happening in the Arab region? In order to answer this question, as an outsider who experienced life in 11 European countries and observed European cultures by meeting stakeholders from heads of governments all the way to the homeless in European streets, allow me to share with you 4 snapshots, 2 successes and 2 failures that might help us understand Europe's actual position from the ongoing change in the neighborhood of the Southern Mediterranean. Snapshot 1, Sweden. In a celebration in the Swedish Embassy in Cairo in 2011 for launching an official website in Arabic produced by the Swedish government about their own state, the ambassador explained that this website is a reaction to a 40% increase in the demand of information on European and Swedish systems by young Egyptians following the fall of Mubarak. The Swedish government later also launched a Twitter account and a Facebook page, both in Arabic as well, in order to communicate directly with the Arab youth who forgot about the unpleasant past and decided to seek answers to question on details of how to run a democracy. Now we can confidently say that Sweden has occupied a very special place in the hearts of young Arabs that secures Sweden with a big stock of respect and appreciation beyond interests of the near future. Comment, little money and respect of other people's aspirations can do wonders that a lot of money might fail to achieve. Snapshot 2, the Netherlands. Following the Arab revolutions and the fall of dictators, the Netherlands quickly observed that the old regimes have not fallen yet, and many voices of young democracy advocates have been violently shut. The Dutch government decided to launch a radio station and website in Arabic called Huna Sautak, meaning here's your voice, a very valuable and critical tool that is now working as a loud voice for democracy and freedoms by those who were muted in their homeland. The station and the website have recently become a frequent source of trusted news and analysis for a big audience in the region. Comment: values of democracy can be an easily transmittable message if a government decides and dares to consistently stand for them. Snapshot 3, the UK. Last week, the UK decided to accept the invitation of the Bahraini government to build a military base in their country by the Gulf, continuing to turn a blind eye to the human rights violations and the regular violence and unlawful detentions practiced against the protesters and human rights activists. Comment: post-colonialist hangover with a touch of the 1960s fashion. Snapshot 4, EU diplomacy. In a period of deadly crushing of protesters by the Egyptian police and army, the period when a constitution was quickly cooked, the period when a field marshal, now president, decided to run for elections, despite his promises to the whole world and the EU that he would not do so, Lady Catherine Ashton decides to spend a part of her Christmas vacation in Egypt, regardless of the concerns that this could be locally perceived as an EU approval of such severe violations of democracy. Anyway, the message was sent, and it was very well locally received. Comment? Well, I prefer to leave this one for you. Now my conclusion. 1. Europe in general and the EU in particular by intention are for supporting values of democracy, freedom of expression and international human rights law. 2. The EU expenditure on supporting the above-mentioned values is very big. However, expenditure on what's so-called economic development is more of an indirect support of dictatorships for the sake of a stability myth that wishfully might provide Europe with trade partners. 3. In the beginning of 2011, right after the breakout of the Arab revolutions, values have finally won in the classical dilemma of contemporary Europe, values versus interests, where interests have always won. With the first obstacle met, since it was not as spring as expected, majority of EU member states and some units within the EU decided to jump off the ship of values after it has just sailed and quickly take the rescue boats back to the shore they are historically familiar with, the old shore of interests. 4. In addition to member states' interests, some European companies do engage in dirty businesses with dictators ranging from labor and natural resources exploitation up to providing them with weapons and surveillance technologies to be used against citizens. Letting this happen makes any message of democracy sent to those fighting for it more of a message of hypocrisy than anything else. 5. Despite the fear of the other, European societies strongly believe in values of democracy and freedom for the same other. I would even claim that those values are deeply rooted in the minds of majority of European citizens. However, political representatives of European citizens have a much lower ceiling for the same values of freedom and democracy for that other. Final remark. The EU should not look at itself as an investment bank where member states are profit-seeking shareholders and big companies are backdoor brokers of financial transfers and get away unquestioned. There is no need for Europe to launch more or spend more on democratization programs. In order for Europe to have any message of democracy sent to those in the South, first, Europe needs to be consistent and coherent on all levels before having that message well received and clearly understood as a message of democratic values. Again, the EU is not an investment bank. It should be a political union that works for the prosperity and peace of its own societies, which will only be attained when exporting value of democracy is a higher priority than exporting commodities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maher, with that brilliant final talk on the first panel. What I'd like to do is to ask first the panel members if anyone has a 2-minute comment on the other panel members' speech, and then I would turn the questions to the audience. Anyone?
I would just a small remark, not comment on Nadim's speech. Just an observation, an adding point, is that Middle East is full of differences between different nations, even inside the nations. We cannot put Middle East in general in the one basket. The situation in each country is different. Now, Egypt, taking Egypt as example, some say that a military coup has established a military dictatorship against the freely elected government, And on the other hand, you see that radio, TVs, and journals, independents, are free. That's a big contradiction that you cannot find the similarity in any other country, for example, Iran. Or the situations are changing. A few years ago, Turkey was among the free countries. Europe almost was ready to receive Turkey in Brussels. But now, where is Turkey? He is taking Iran's place as the biggest prison for journalists in the Middle East. So, talking about the Middle East, I think we have to focus on each country separately.
To respond briefly, talking about the media in Egypt, I think the term independent is a bit of a myth. We have to be very careful with using this term with any sort of media that is not run by the state in Egypt. State-run media is a story that we all understand, and we might not need to get in details with this. But for what is so-called independent media, I would rather call it private media more than independent. Because with the term private, it explains power relationships and who owns whatever media outlet, because it all represents power relations in favor of whoever is in power. So it's owned by the business elite in relation with the political elite and sometimes the military, and this is how they shape public opinion. So independence of the media in Egypt, again, is a myth. Thank you.
Excuse me. First, I agree. In my macro approach to the problem, I have combined all countries as if they are in the same level of challenge in dealing with the topic. I concur that this is not the case, and I agree. But to stir some controversy, and if you would allow me, Mr. Chairman, also I would like, while I presented the macro view on the subject, and I stick to it, and I'm willing to discuss it, I have some comments that, one, in 2014, old media is over. It's the most ineffective way of spending money. Radios, televisions, I mean, the Americans have spent tons of money. The effectiveness, zilch, nothing. So, to go back to and basically come up with ideas that fall into the old school of media and communicating during the communist era is no longer there. Two, to stir some controversy, I do not believe that a pure or a Puritan approach to democracy would help the case of democracy. Yes, we have to recognize that sometimes policies is something very complex. I would not ask the European community to go almost into boycotting any trade or exchange of commodities between some of these countries. On the contrary, I think we have to enhance the communication, be it on the social, cultural, economic, or otherwise. I want to make the argument that, based on my experience after the assassination of Mr. Hariri, Prime Minister Hariri in 2005, and throughout even the Arab Spring, the half-a-minute video or the one-minute video was the more powerful means of communicating certain messages. I think, or I believe, that governments or regimes that attempt to block the new technology in order to prevent people from access to information is not working, and it will not work. Even the Americans, I read last week an article that the Americans are trying to find something on to curb the success of ISIS in their media campaign, and it will not work. You know, you want to deal with ISIS, you have to deal with it at its grassroots. So my argument is that goodbye to old media. It doesn't work. We cannot be Puritan. And what I will propose is a more engaging, multi-dimensional approach by the European, be it individual countries or the European Parliament, in a multitude of activities. And we have to recognize, and I agree with you, this is not a short run or a short time crisis management. It's a long-term endeavor. Thank you.
I take my also 2 minutes to point a very important but fine point that Nadima Mullah mentioned about Charlotte Beers. Public diplomacy is not the right place to communicate values, because the messenger and the message of the values, deep values, gets confused with the foreign policy when it's the same purveyors who are trying to do both jobs. Maher mentioned representatives of Europe were not as trusted. Their ceiling was lower than the values of the European citizen.
I didn't use trusted, but yes, the ceiling is lower.
And that shows that it's people-to-people communication that has to be enhanced and encouraged. Charlotte Beers was the smartest, head of 2 out of the top 5 advertising agencies of the world, but she made her fame in selling Uncle Ben's rice. And I told her, you know, when you're talking about Uncle Ben's rice, the referent is the same thing to everybody. We go to the shop, pick it up, taste it. It's the same thing. But when you're talking about values, in different cultures, the reference of those values are quite different. Freedom means one thing there. Freedom means something quite, tolerance means something quite different in Saudi Arabia than in New York. As my one-man poll in Jama Malik Saud once said, tolerant, New York? The lawyer has written the fine print and is ready to take your seat as soon as you've got up. That is why it's critical to do 2 things. 1, separate public diplomacy from communicating values people to people, number 1. And 2, partner with those civil societies that exist and are vibrant, because they understand the context and the contextual meaning of the message much better. Thank you very much. Now we turn to the audience. Your questions, please be brief. Say who you are and say who the question is directed to. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ana Fernandez. I'm working here at the Parliament, and I would like to thank the organization of the conference. I've been here for almost 3 months, and it's the first time that I've seen something so directly on this topic and so solutions-orientated. So I'm really pleased, and I find it very interesting. I would like to tackle a few things that you've said, and I think when targeting audiences, one of the main things that we should bear in mind is that our main audience should be young people, to my view at least, especially when speaking about this topic. And I think that fits all the criteria Mr. Mullah pointed out about long-term perspective, about multiple dimension, because we can obviously not tackle this issue without speaking about economic development and so on and so forth. What I find, though, is that the EU is doing quite well on policies, but not so well on programs, so not so well on the implementation level. So on policies, we point out very well the fact that we need to improve participation, tolerance, human rights, but then our programs are extremely confusing. and the Commission, our executive body, has two competitors in this scenario. So we have DG DEFCO with two programs that are targeting the same audience and the same values. The Euromed Youth, that is in its 5th phase, and while we were waiting for the approval of the 5th phase, and because we were not sure that we would get it approved, we decided to launch a new program that is exactly the same. It's a partnership with UNESCO, but basically the aims, the audience, everything is pretty much the same. And then we have DG Culture and Education with the Erasmus Plus and its external dimension. That, again, is doing pretty much the same. So I find it extremely inefficient, and I do think that when communicating values, it's more, as you pointed out as well, is more than just about the media, but it's mainly about engaging with people and people-to-people contact. So I believe it's through experienced democratic values that we are going to achieve something. So it's just my comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdallah. I'm from Egypt. I work as a policy researcher. Actually, my master's thesis was on the European Union democracy promotion policy in the last 4 years. So I like to engage like with only one story in this. Last week on Facebook, I have witnessed a small one-photo, 3-line story of an Egyptian mother living in Germany, walking 3 kilometers to the bus. And she sent an email to the local government. Local government responded after a week. We will discuss it. A week later, they introduce a new bus line in front of her door, just to deliver her kid to school every day. So one in the morning, one at night. This small story is what local people in Egypt think it is democracy. This small story got like 12 million share, like 2-something million comment in 1 week. What is the cost of this? Is again actions or advertising. I agree with advertising will never work. Especially in our community, we will never trust. We will not trust whatever you're saying. But what you are doing in your communities, what you are exercising democracy here, and how can you really communicate your practices of democracy is what matters. We will get it, we will understand it, and we will have aspiration to have similar situation in our countries. We will work for it, we will advocate for it, and we will pressure our government for it. Just practice it in your places, open it up for people to communicate it. It will work. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ali. Just a comment for Mr. Mustafi. When I'm listening to Radio Farda, representative say, for example, now is the time to listen to an Iranian song. And after that, Gugush, Ebi, Dariush start. In other time, well, say, now is the time to listen to a local song and start a Kurdish of Arabic of Baluchi song. I'm sure that the Radio Farda is not following the Islamic Republic constitutions, because just inside the Islamic Republic constitution, Farsi is an Iranian language, Kurdish, Arabic, Baluchi are local language. Why Radio Farda has such a policy to Iran, and Iran is a multicultural country? Thank you.
2 points in your remark. First, about the word. Local music is not the best translation for musique mahalli. In Iran, even before the Islamic Revolution, we used to translate folk songs or folk music to musique mahalli. Here, music mahalli means folkloric music, not local music. That's just the question of translation of the word and the usage of the word since decades. But on the ethnical question in Iran, I will profit of your remark to open this issue. Yes, the ethnical issue exists in Iran. The right of different ethnics, different cultures. You are fully right that in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic, they have somehow escaped the recognition of this right. You said the policy of Radio Farda does not have any. When I talk about the democratic values here, that's what we talk in our newsroom with my colleagues. To be honest, independently of different interpretations, for democratic document, I don't know rather than one, the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. And in Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, the freedom of speech, freedom of political activities, parties, labor union, and languages, ethnics, religion, everything is written there. So we do not have any red line to respect the, if we can say, superiority of the Persian language in Iran. Needless to say that in the management of Radio Farda, none of managers are natively Persian speaking, including myself. No, for us, Iran is a Iranian is a nation, is a people, is a country composed by different ethnics. From the importance of number, I can say Azeri, Turks, Kurds, Arabs, Baluch, Turkmen. Well, some of them are more insisting on their cultural identity, like Kurds and Azeris and Baluch. Some are less, like Gilaks, for example. Some are more discriminated by the Islamic regime, not just on the side of ethnicity or language, but mainly on religious side. You know, Azeri Turkish is not used in Iran as an official language, even local official language. But Azeris are not as discriminated as the Kurds are. The Kurds are much more discriminated. Azeri is not used as language, but the dictator of the country is Azeri, and the chief of opposition during 5 years in house arrest is Azeri as well. We have information that the most part of the intelligence body and the regime's force controlling Kurdistan is composed by Azeris. So the degree of discrimination is not the same. Or about Arabs we can talk in other words, for Baluch the same. So Radio Farda has no policy against Iranian ethnics, Iranian languages, or to reinforce Persian language, or to respect this or that constitution. Our constitution is the Declaration, Universal Declaration of the Human Rights.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ramin Parham. I'm an Iranian writer and a member of Unity for Democracy in Iran. I have a question for Madame Skache. The question is in two parts. The first part is subsidiarity. well-known European principle. And the second one, the second part of it has to do with the question of scale. On the first part, the question of subsidiarity, we do not have European neighborhoods or communities in the Middle East, but we do have Middle Eastern neighborhoods and communities here in Europe. And what can be done at the level of the people cannot be done at the level and should not be done at the level of the state. So why can't we turn to these Middle Eastern communities living since long ago in Europe in order to effectively reach the main body of these people in the Middle East? And that refers to the principle of subsidiarity, and if there is one place to talk about subsidiarity, it is Brussels. The second part of the question has to do with scale. As you know, Madam Skache, it is the scale that makes the phenomenon. If we want to reach effectively the people in the Middle East, we have to make the distinction between the different people making up the Middle East. As you know, Kurdish fighters, female fighters, have been on the battleground since decades ago, whereas in other parts of the Middle East, a female pilot makes, headlines because it is so new. So, how would you make the distinction between these different people and the different aptitudes and readiness for accepting democratic values in the Middle East at different scales? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. The idea of subsidiarity is that decisions and governance should happen on the level closest to the people. So when it's a local affair about building a parking lot or a park, it can be done by the municipal government. If it is about the substance of education, for example, in Europe, it's done by the national government. But if it exceeds the level of one country, it happens on the EU level. And then there are still differences in what the EU can do according to our rules, which is the Lisbon Treaty. And since 2009, we have the competence, as we call it, the authority to work on a common foreign and security policy. Now, I'm one of the strong critics because I think it's not delivering the way it should in relation to a changing world. I also think it is not as much based on values as it should be. To the points of, trade interests and other interests sometimes seeming to take precedent over the very essence of what we believe an open society should be and the universality of human rights and how that is actually mainstreamed in our policies. So I think the EU should be a stronger global player, and that foreign and security policy should have integrated as a mainstreamed element these fundamental rights and universal rights into them. It's a work in progress. There's always a tension between politics and media. I think it is really important that politicians will not and do not seem to be influencing substance, that there is full independence and full editorial and journalistic discretion for journalists to do their work. And that's, of course, why the European Parliament does not decide on which media programs get funded and which don't, because it would be too politicized. And I would hope, as you mentioned, that the European Parliament reflects these European values more than anyone else, but we also face a Parliament where there is an increasing number of people here that would like to do away with the European Union, that have very nationalist policies, and that certainly would not be interested in any foreign policy activities, let alone on the basis of democratic values. So we are a diverse house here ourselves, and what we do is we can, on the one hand, make changes through the budget, so we can allocate money in different locations, which I've worked on to make sure, for example, that technologies are used to advance human rights and media freedom. But also the reports I mentioned that I worked on have been largely adopted into EU guidelines that are used worldwide, and maybe Mr. Gonzato will say something about that later, guidelines on freedom of expression online and offline. And so they guide diplomats and policies all over the world with regard to ensuring freedom of expression online and offline are advanced by the EU. You then asked why not work with minority communities in Europe. I think nothing stands in the way of minority communities engaging with people either elsewhere in the world or in the countries of their ancestors' origin, of their own origin. Sometimes, though, and this is more a timely discussion now, we also see that being of a minority community doesn't always lead to similar democratic values to be embraced. There's no guarantee for that. People make their own decisions, and we have the freedom to do that. We also see, for example, very conservative alliances with governments of countries, for example, the government of Turkey, that does not respect the freedom of expression or media freedom. So I think we should not really, as governments, seek to work with minority communities specifically unless it has a particular goal, for the sake of diversity. So, for example, Dutch public broadcasters allocate time for minority communities, whether they be ethnic minorities or religious minorities, to have their own airtime. That is a way to create diversity through public funds. But I think a lot of the other initiatives should either happen on the basis of merits. So, for example, if there's a journalist with particular language skills or particular journalistic skills as a result of his or her background, then that could put them in that position. But I think this is something that happens outside of the reach of government, and that's probably good. Then you asked about scale and the notion of diversity within communities and whether or not there are, if I understand your question correctly, specific communities or minorities in North Africa and the Middle East that are more or less susceptible to democratic values. And I would say, of course. I mean, there is a lively and sometimes explosive and murderous battle going on for where the agenda and the values will go in a lot of places in the Middle East. But I don't think that this is necessarily along specific minority lines. I think it cuts across societies in a political way more than anything else. Political Islam can be extreme sometimes, but it doesn't mean that it's tied to everyone from one or the other community. It's a political ideology more than anything else, is how I assess it. I think the way we should look at it in Europe, this also relates back to some of the questions asked about content, is that diversity and respect for minorities in and of itself is a value. And it is sadly one that is often not respected. In many communities in North Africa and the Middle East, minorities are discriminated against, are not treated equally, et cetera, et cetera. It's part of, I think, the problem. If we have an ideal democratic society, then minority rights would be respected as, and their human rights would be guaranteed all the same as all the other people. But this is not the reality, and we face challenges with that at home as well.
Hello, my name is Shima Silavi. I'm a human rights activist and a member of the Arab community of Iran. My question is for Mr. Maher Hamoud. One of the problems that actually we face after the revolutions in Arabic country is actually it's not a new problem, it's always been the misunderstanding between what is the reality actually and what is happening in Middle East and the perspective of people outside Middle East. For example, now when Mr. Mustafi till earlier thought that in Egypt after President Sisi, there is a great amount of journalism freedom or independent journalism, as he said, but this is not the reality. So we even know, I don't know, a lot of people knew about a comic show called Bassem Youssef show, Al-Barnamek, which, for example, in the time of President Morsi used to be showed, and after the President Sisi came and after the coup d'etat or the military power came over, they stopped airing this show. So we see there is what is the reality, which is what is happening now in Egypt, and this is what people's perspective or what is happening in Egypt, which is not true at all. So what is the ways to actually cancel all these differences and actually make a huge awareness for people, so that other people who are not actually living in Egypt know what is happening in Egypt or know about what is happening in Syria, and we make this difference between the perspective less and less. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. First, I have to make sure that you didn't understand that I was saying media is more free after Morsi. I didn't say that at all. And all what you said is an evidence of it's not, of the opposite of that. All what you said, like stopping Bassem Youssef's show and other things, is also a sign that media is much less free in Egypt. Yeah, so just to make it clear that I didn't say anything else. Back to your question, understanding what is happening in a country, in another country, will always be less, because, but it will be different from a country to another, based on historical relations and interests, and also how the media is covering what is happening locally and how it is transferred abroad. There are always ways of improving this way of communication, like producing in other languages or interest coming from the other country. So yes, for the Middle East, for example, there are a couple of problems of media production or news production. First, repressive regimes. Private media in favor of business interests. And also there's a problem of sometimes, and it differs from a country to another, the quality of media production and standards of news production in general. That also harms the message that can be sent abroad. But other than that, it's again a problem of interest from outside. It's not only one direction. It works both ways. And I don't know if your question is actually very big and might need a big discussion, but I think this is what I can say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're about out of time. I would ask each one of the panel members to do a 1-minute wrap-up, and being great communicators, I'm sure you can do it. Say a lot in 1 minute. And we'll start in reverse order this time. Mr. Hamid.
Thank you. That was a surprise, but try to be brief. Again, I would like to make it clear that I personally get the message that the EU is for values of democracy abroad, but it's a matter of implementation. It's a problem of inconsistency on the levels, comparing the level of the EU general policy, member states, and European companies. If Europe can get these three levels in terms of values resolved, you will be able to send a much stronger message of democracy without the need of spending more. Thank you.
Mr. Mostofi.
Well, today we have been received here by European Union, European Parliament, to talk about communicating democratic values. I'm working in an American organization who has defined the same topic as its mission. We do our job, but the people of the Middle East, and in what I know better, the Iranians, Iranian journalists, Iranian writers, they did not wait for us to communicate democratic values in their societies. Looking at the number of Iranian writers, Iranian journalists, Iranian labor union activists, ethnic activists, as has been mentioned, defenders of human rights, women's rights, and unfortunately, that is really sorry to say, recently even the defenders of environment and ecologists are in jail. So that shows that the people did not wait or do not wait for us to communicate the same values. We are just a help for them.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Al-Mullah gets to have the last word.
I would like to reiterate maybe a position that did not receive enough discussion. I concur and I agree that some small micro decisions relating to funding a particular program or media initiative has a positive impact. But I think it's up to the Europeans to decide how vital and how fast this process of democracy should move in the Middle East, and I agree to varying degrees between one country and another. I basically would continue to push for a broader approach to the problem. A broader meaning it's a multidimensional, and it cannot be only media-oriented. It has to be much more than that, including foreign policy, including cultural policy, including social policy. I am an advocate of deep-rooted engagement policy on all levels, and I think this is the only way that we will see the spread of democracy moving much faster in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the first panel, and we ended exactly in good timekeeping. So we only have a couple of minutes before we start the second panel. On your behalf, I thank all of the panelists for their very valuable contribution. Thank you very much. Well, if you'll kindly take your seats.
I'm not quite ready. They're calling a tech person over to help me with this.
Hi, Dennis.
That's fine.
Is that okay?
That's okay.
Is it not working?
Mine's not working now.
Oh, Beamer. So what did you do exactly?
Yeah.
Yes. That's what we did.
Yeah, I can't get it to work.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Do you think that will work? Is it the frequency?
If you'll kindly take your places, and also people close to the door may tell anyone outside who would like to come that we're about to start the second panel.
Yes.
Okay, so I need someone to help me. Okay.
That will take a while.
All right, I'm gonna have to go last then.
Okay. Yes. If you could come, that would be really nice. Thanks very much. Yes, we will. But he should be getting presentation right now. So could you come up and check? Yes, I know.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah. I will let you know.
Yes, you are sending a signal.
Okay.
The price just there.
Okay, thanks.
That's right. This one's not working yet, so maybe we should have someone else go first instead of Alex.
Okay. Can you fix it while we're going? Can you fix it while we are?
Yeah. Yeah, we are.
Okay, we are. An introduction to those who are new, arrived. We're not with the first panel. This is a session on communicating democratic values. How can Europe effectively reach people in the Middle East? How can Europeans communicate their shared core values with people in the Middle East? And it is chaired at the invitation initiative of Ms. Marietje Schaake, MEP. I would take the liberty of saying that the Wall Street Journal blog dubs her as the most wired European politician. The first panel was about the challenges faced in communicating these values, and now with panel 2 we move to solutions. I would like to introduce the panel members. Mr. Alex Gladstein, is the Director of Institutional Affairs at the New York-based Human Rights Foundation, where he works to support activists and challenge authoritarianism around the world. He has concurrently served as Vice President of Strategy for the Oslo Freedom Forum since its inception in 2009. Mr. Fred Anden is online editor-in-chief of Radio Farda, which is Radio Free, Radio Liberty's Persian language service. He co-edited and co-wrote a book on Iranian protest movements based on citizen media, Hope, Votes, and Bullets in 2010, and is a co-founder of the award-winning March 18 movement to raise awareness about bloggers' safety around the world. Mr. Ahmad Ben Shamsi is editor-in-chief of freearabs.com. He is a Stanford University fellow. He's a founder and editor-in-chief of freearab.com, a platform perpetuating the spirit of the Arab Spring. And he also founded and was a publisher and editor of Kelkel and Nishan, Morocco's 2 best-selling news magazines. And finally, Mr. Leon Willems from Free Press Unlimited. He serves as the director of Free Press Unlimited since May 2011. Free Press Unlimited supports independent journalism worldwide, initiates and assists the creation of independent media, because people deserve to know. Free Press Unlimited works in 40 repressive and fragile countries, and the staff are proud to be involved with some of the most successful media efforts. We are going to change the order a bit because of a technical difficulty of Mr. Gladstein's presentation. So with a bit of rotation, we first start with Mr. Fred Anden.
I always say never trust technology, and human beings can do much better. I try to be brave in 7-9 minutes. It's like, speed dating, and you should, be very fast. And I try to make a couple of research that we have done with universities together. And if you want any kind of information, please, I'd be more than glad to send you by email.
I think the model is very simple. EU wants, to communicate democratic values to Middle East, including Iran, where I am from. There is a sender, is this communication model, it's EU, and there is a receiver, potential receiver, Iranian or Middle Eastern people, and there is the message, democratic values. Of course, there is noise, challenges, censorship, dictators, and so on. But just and interests versus values that our friends talked about that in previous panel. Just imagine there is a perfect world and there is no noise. I think even at that period, EU cannot communicate its values because it's not ready and doesn't know what message to communicate with to which audience. I think it hasn't worked yet, to know what these people want, and so on. Let's little bit to see that during the last 12 months, what Iranians have done. If they were hopeless, or they were engaged, or they wanted to participate at that. The numbers I mentioned they are not representative of Iranian population, but they are indicators that give us some insights into what is going on. We are doing now a project with Harvard University to know about citizens and internet, and it hasn't been published yet. But just as a raw material that I can share with you, in 12 months we talked about 300, 400 Iranians within Iran, and most of them participated in online campaigns, and even more than one. And the best thing in that, when they say, do you think who is going to get influenced by that, they are not fool enough. They don't say that Iranian government, they don't say Iran media-based in country, but the three things come first. Public opinion, international organizations, that is EU included, and international media, because the word is going to be spread and they are going to cover that. Before coming here, I talked and I sent email to 10 Iranian academics, writers, and cyber activists just to get their idea about how we can, at which period is the best to communicate democratic values to Iranians. Fortunately, Rami Parviz, one of them, is here present. He can say that I'm not bluffing or lying about that. And one point was very interesting, that Iranians usually are indifferent to the political discourse, but when there is a question of campaign, social or political campaigns, is the best moment to communicate to Iranians. And they are ready to get, they have potential to get involved. They are ready to listen to that. I think one of the EU can do is at that moment not only cover these stories or amplify that, but presenting a lot of examples that what happened in these 28 countries regarding to this kind of campaigns against violence, for protecting environment, and so on, to give Iranians much more, not only self-confidence, but know that there are people who are listening to them and creating a kind of bridge between different people. One other research that is done in recent months is by National Endowment for Democracy's project, Iran Voices. 5 cities were asked to whom they trust more. And between the candidates there was there was not foreign-based media. There were local media, local newspapers, local internet, and friends and neighbors. I mean, the first people that they trust are neighbors and friends. They don't trust at all to local media, but friends come at the 5 cities, including Qom, Ahvaz, Mashhad, and Shiraz. Friends come first. Maybe what Gabriel Marquez says is true, that reality is not made of facts, but of the ways we relate them. The human voices have a lot of impact on people. And what EU has the potential to do that is that sharing in a completely attractive package the democratic movements, the people who make changes in these 28 countries, people who led campaigns and so on in an attractive way by using animation or creative ways to Iranians or to Middle East people. It always, has good feedback. Asking people to listen to the democracy speeches or how the boring administration works is not going to work out. Nobody going to relate to them. It has never happened because it's going to create a kind of external concept that people are asked to follow rather than showing them that it is beneficiary for them this way to go. The campaigns against violence, environment, corruption, and just name it, and it worked out. In Radio Farda, we had a very good experience when even, Hegel becomes fun and people listen and relate to that. And we find out that Ramin Jahanbegloo, Iranian philosopher in Toronto for the rest of us, lectures, for years, into a small group about, Hegel or other philosophical concepts and how they have impact on Iranian society. It's kind of humanized that and simplified these concepts. But unfortunately, they didn't get hit. It's just, 200, 300 in YouTube, which is nothing at all. We just started to cover that on our Radio Farda's platform with video and so on. And thousands of people like, share, and send feedback. It becomes among of the most emailed stories. The reason I think is simple. People get related to them. And Hegel is not, or civil society doesn't become an abstract concept, but something that they can relate to their daily life. I think more we do these stories, more we do this bridge making between, concrete stories and Iranian population, it works out. Years ago, we did Arabs and Iranians work together. It's not a joke. It's true. We had the opportunity to work with Ezra Al-Shaifi from Bahrain, head of Mideast Youth and creator of it. What we did, we created an animation for jailed bloggers worldwide by focusing on Iran because the first blogger passed away in prison was an Iranian. And we really put it with a form of animation. And it gets, about 100,000 hits and views, and people like that. I imagine if we just put, a statement, it hadn't worked out at all. I just make a short wrap-up. To make, things move on in Iranian community and getting, this message of democratic values passed, we need to create online communities. But creating online communities is not an easy thing to do because it's kind of, everybody now its own bubble and they don't really connect with each other. It's through the working out with small groups, trying to make people interest on one concept. And what EU can do that is that to make these stories as human interest stories, which had very concrete impact on the European societies, available to Iranians via creative ways, not boring speeches, but animations, man-to-man, woman-to-woman talk, and platforms that people can exchange. I think it will work out without any doubt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amden. You proved the introduction that you really understand how social media work in this world. And we are happy to hear that Mr. Gladstein's technical problems are resolved. So without further ado.
Good morning, everyone. And thanks so much to the organizers. I'm honored to be here to speak to you on behalf of the Human Rights Foundation. We're a New York-based advocacy group, and our mission is to promote individual rights and liberal democracy around the world. We do that mainly by supporting dissidents and at-risk journalists, and we expose and challenge dictatorship all across the world. One of our biggest programs is the Oslo Freedom Forum. It's a 3-day conference that we host once a year in Norway. The Oslo Freedom Forum is a place where we bring activists and dissidents from all across the globe together with leaders from philanthropy, policy, media, technology, and business, so we can share experiences, trade ideas, and jumpstart initiatives to achieve free and open societies. The BBC calls it the Davos for dissidents, and the New York Times reviewed it as a place where the world's activists have their say. Through our work in Oslo, we've met some extraordinary individuals advancing freedom, many from the Middle East. They are changing their societies from the inside out, from the ground up. I wanted to share a few of their stories with you today. Each one is an example of someone that you can support to promote democratic values. But first, a little about the world they are trying to improve. Today, only 45% of the world's countries respect the human rights of their citizens and enshrine individual liberties. These are the only places that can be defined politically as free. Now, the rest of the world is divided into 30% partially free societies and 25% dictatorships. Authoritarianism, unfortunately, is the prevailing political model and an overwhelming problem in the Middle East. In terms of human beings, 3.9 billion people, or 57% of the world's population, live under non-democracies. So sadly today, even in 2014, 2.4 billion people still live under fully fledged dictatorships where one man or one small group of men, it's of course never women, control absolutely everything. At the UN General Assembly, more than half of the delegates that you see there represent governments that routinely violate the human rights of their citizens. It's just as bad at the UN Human Rights Council. In the heart of the organization, founded to bring peace to the world after the horrors of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, 70 years later, tyrannies like Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Russia, and China play outsized roles. And the number of journalists imprisoned and killed throughout the world is rising. Unfortunately, so many of the world's black holes of press freedom are in the Middle East, as you see. With human rights abusers controlling the rules of the game and silencing those who criticize them, Europe's role in promoting democratic values is increasingly important. Now, we understand that the policymakers who are here have no choice but to work with some of these repressive regimes in some areas. But let's be honest, these dialogues are unlikely to trigger meaningful reform. Dictators are very good at staying in power. Where you can bring democratic change is by empowering civil society. Activists, artists, and journalists are deserving of your support as you try and communicate democracy more effectively. Last week I was talking to an Egyptian businesswoman, she's a friend of mine, and she was saying that, in her view, one of the areas where democratic development in the Middle East can happen and where it's going to come from is through art, media, and entrepreneurship. She said the values you learn through these careers, whether it's analytical skills, teamwork, loyalty, and especially accepting failure, are vital to the future of the region. She told me how the value system in her country, Egypt at least, makes it hard for students to question authority. That it almost puts your mind to sleep. She said that she was brought up not to question, not to seek the truth. But art, films, and video games, these things can help people question the establishment. My friend Suleiman Bahit is an artist in Jordan, and he understands this perfectly. He is an entrepreneur who started asking children in poor neighborhoods in Jordan about their heroes. They would respond, saying their heroes were bin Laden or Zarqawi. To counter this narrative of extremism, he created a series of comic books and video games for kids with new Arab superheroes, with many that actually star female characters. His art and games have sold millions of copies and have become extremely popular in the region. Years later, he went back to those same schools in those same poor neighborhoods in Jordan and asked those kids again who their heroes were. They talked about his comic book characters, not bin Laden. After speaking at the Oslo Freedom Forum in October, Suleiman has picked up significant support for his efforts. The organizers of the Middle East's largest anti-extremism conference invited him to give their keynote address after seeing his talk, which he gave yesterday. And 2 weeks ago, he was featured as the New York Times Saturday profile after meeting a reporter in Oslo. This is a brilliant project that we at HRF are proud to support. It's basically fighting the Goliath of extremism, misogyny, and authoritarianism with David's slingshot, as he calls it, a comic book. It's a cheap, nonviolent, and very effective way of creating a better future. Bassem Youssef was also with us at the Oslo Freedom Forum. You probably know him well. He became a megastar in the Arab world by making fun of government. He tapped into something that comedy can spark serious political discussion. With satire, he was able to connect with people in a way that others couldn't. He was able to inspire millions of people to think critically about their government. Predictably, the Egyptian dictatorship did not like Bassem's show very much, and he was forced off the air this past spring. The Middle East lost a key voice, but I hope you can consider ways to find the next Bassem and support their efforts to mock repression. One thing that Egypt's Jon Stewart has taught us is that humor is a key ingredient for any free society. Now I get to talk about one of my heroes. Saudi women's rights activist Manal Sharif came to Oslo in 2012 to accept the Václav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent. She also gave a remarkable speech that went viral inside Saudi Arabia, being viewed hundreds of thousands of times, as you can see here. Now, Manal isn't an artist or a journalist, but her advocacy was wonderfully creative. By getting in a car and challenging the misogynist Saudi regime's ban on women driving, she sparked a normally taboo conversation about political change that caught fire in her country. In the struggle against repression, Manal showed us that one way of breaking through a climate of fear is to start small. If you've seen the news this week, you've heard that the Women to Drive movement continues to inspire people to rise up against their government. Their bravery is worth your support and attention. The last person I'll talk about today is Mariam Al-Khawaja from Bahrain. Her family's plight is probably well known to you. Her father is a political prisoner who is often on hunger strike, and her sister was just sentenced yesterday to more than a year in jail for tearing up a picture of the king. She herself was arrested earlier this year, all for the crime of promoting democracy. You should consider that people in the Middle East aren't going to take European policymakers seriously unless you are consistent. You can't just criticize some dictatorships. You have to criticize all of them, including the one ruling Bahrain. If more European parliamentarians started to refer to the rulers of Bahrain as what they really are, corrupt tyrants, then you'd earn some more credibility and respect. I know this is easy for me to say as an activist, and probably a lot harder for you to say as a policymaker, but the truth is it's going to be very difficult to get people to trust you if you're picking and choosing human rights violations to speak out about. So in the same way, if you want to communicate democratic values to people in the Middle East, you have to be consistent. Please, I urge you to bring dissidents and journalists from all countries across the Middle East here to help build their networks and raise their profiles. You should consider more film festivals, prizes, and competitions. If you support local initiatives like Suleiman's comic books, you can really inspire democratic change. These people are the ones who are going to actually revolutionize their societies, not the dictators in power. So keep bringing them here. Europe is a great place for dissidents to meet each other and also learn from their counterparts in similar struggles across the world, whether it be Zimbabwe, Cuba, or China. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that international solidarity is essential. So you can visit the href.org to learn more about our efforts and networks. And please consider joining us at the next Oslo Freedom Forum. The next one will take place from May 25th to May 27th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gladstein. Mr. Ben-Shamsi.
I need also to plug it in. Okay.
Do you want to speak to me?
Yes.
If you're not ready, we can we change again because there's a technical issue. Mr. Willett.
Well, thank you. And thanks to the organizers and everyone here. I will try to address some of the dark holes of European policy. If you want to know more about Free Press Unlimited's projects, etc., I encourage you to go to the website. We initiated projects like Radio Zamaneh for Iran. We also created Radio Debanga, which is an extremely successful, very old-school media, shortwave radio, 6 million listeners on a weekly basis in Darfur. So I think we know a little bit about it. But I think it is important to focus on what can Europe do, what is Europe doing, and try to formulate some recommendations. First of all, some observations. In the last year, more than 40 countries some of them European, have established legislation to restrict internet access. We are seeing a 10 to 15-year curve, negative curve, of press freedom worldwide. And one of the most sad aspects of this is the total lack of reporter safety. These are 3 points that I think need to be observed and digested by everyone before jumping ahead to formulate project proposals. We're not doing well, and we're, to a certain extent, rowing against the tide. And maybe an additional observation, it was said in the first panel, actually, when it comes to media, the free market is not a solution to deliver a multi-voice, pluralist media landscape, as you can see clearly in countries like Turkey, Egypt, let alone speak about Syria and other places. So it's just to mark the urgency of the debate. Let me try to formulate a couple of principles. First of all, I think that, as my colleague from Iran was saying, if you want to deliver values, then one of the most important things is that you need legitimacy, credibility, and trust. Legitimacy, credibility, and trust is not dispensed easily by local populations. And just for the sake of argument, I would say that no matter how good the intentions of international extraterrestrial broadcasters are, they are not often a legitimate actor in the discussion about freedom and democracy and the development of democratic values in a society, as they are seen as an outside voice. And it has something to do with legitimacy, credibility, and trust. We need local actors, because local actors from inside change societies, and unfortunately, it is not diasporic communities. Notwithstanding the great efforts that people are doing from the outside, and not disputing any of their intentions. Change comes from inside, not from outside. Another principle that I would like to formulate, which is very relevant to the EU at the moment, because I think the EU also has to make up its mind, that's the more important issue of the balance between security and freedoms. And I would like to reiterate Frank LaRue's, the former UN rapporteur for freedom of expression, observation that there is no balance between security and freedom. If we jeopardize freedoms and democratic values for the sake of security, we've lost the battle already. It's a hard discussion because, as I said, internet legislation is restrictive in the last years. It's no longer a place and a platform where freedoms are delivered. It's a place that excels in persecution methods, and it's losing rapidly its meaningfulness. And so a reinvigoration of the digital agenda of the EU would be extremely important, especially the no disconnect strategy. I'd also like to say a few words which are not mine, so please go ahead and accuse me of imperialism. I'm happy to. It's the words of Marwan Mouasher, Jordanian former minister, who tried to leverage Access to Information Act in Jordan. In a conference last week, he said, there is a big problem when you leverage democratic values in the Arab world. It lacks a culture of pluralism. So what is a culture of pluralism? It's very difficult to define, but it is definitely not giving the access to the floor of those who yell the most hard. And so pluralism goes about creating a debate platform where people have access and are not sidelined because of extremist or fragmentation or marginalization efforts. that is a very big problem. Because, as I said, it's not something that you can leverage from the outside. You have to create this culture of pluralism inside. And it goes back to a lot of things that were said about religious minorities, etc. Are we doing enough in that area? So I think that those are a couple of principles, and then I would say that 90%, unfortunately, of politicians think that leveraging democratic values is about sending messages. Well, this doesn't work. You can send as messages as much as you want. Leveraging values is about providing intimate debate, security for those who take part in the debate. It's about true dialogue. It's not about someone saying something to someone else. And I just witnessed an extreme example of that when former BBC presenter Tim Sebastian gave a keynote speech telling all the Arab reporters of the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism that they should not be fearful to challenge authorities. And someone in the audience, 320 Arab journalists, asked Tim Sebastian, have you ever been threatened in your life? And he said, no, not really. So what is the legitimacy of a Westerner saying to Arab journalists, don't feel threatened, you have to challenge authorities? Discussions are complicated. Now let me try to formulate a couple of recommendations. And I'm sorry if this is kind of a scattered panorama that I'm creating. First of all, I think it would be very interesting to look at an EU internal leverage mechanism that leverages democracy as a key indicator for its support. What do I mean? We have an internal EU mechanism that says that if your balance sheet as a government is not in order, you get punished by the EU. We have no punishment inside the EU for democratic values. So what is the legitimacy of the EU going to the Arab world and saying, and raise their fingers about democracy there, if we allow countries like Hungary to make a joke of press freedom and jeopardize pluralism inside the EU? We need a leverage mechanism inside the EU to leverage democratic values and hold each other to account, because it will create a better legitimacy for the EU when it's speaking about democratic values. Same is true a little bit about the European family, because I think for external observers it's very difficult to really understand the formation and the diversity of European institutions. But I'm sure that many people will feel that the Council of Europe, currently being headed by Azerbaijan, which is going on a rampage against journalists, is an outcry. And the EU, simply for the reason that the Council of Europe shares this very important word, Europe, with the European Union, should talk about it and end this catastrophe. That's about legitimacy. That is about credibility. That is about trust. So the EU should get its own house in order. That's recommendation one. Second, I think that we need a reinvigoration and reinvestment in the digital agenda from the European side. We're seeing with the change of the current leadership in the EU and the change of the DGs, etc., we need to bring people around the table, because there is no coherent approach at the moment, and some of the other speakers have talked about that. There's sometimes no coherence between the policy initiatives that have been fostered by the EU Parliament or the Commission and the implementation of that in political domain or in projects. So I would urge the EU to set up coordination mechanisms around freedom of expression and organize a continuous, intelligent debate about it that is strategic and not haphazard. And when I say strategic, I mean that it is not enough to say human rights in Iran are violated and DEFCO has money and you can apply. It just doesn't add up. And that, unfortunately, is the reality in many countries where Iran actually is a rather well-served community. So that's my second point. I think we need to invest in the mechanisms of anti-censorship. We personally are involved in investigating the possibility of European capability for situational awareness. That is deprioritized at the moment by the new incoming people. I think this is wrong. I think also we need to measure, and I'm encouraging Marietje to talk about it, how does she measure progress on the things that are very dear to her in terms of spending on the digital agenda and leveraging tools, etc. How is that happening? Is that transparent? Are we making progress or not? It's not very clear to me, and I'm a half insider, I would say. So that's my second recommendation. The third recommendation, and I would like to stress the words that were said by Mr. Munia earlier, we need a multidimensional approach. I strongly oppose the idea of having this bipolar world of good people and bad people, and the EU is on the side of the good people. I think we need a multidimensional approach. We need more exchange programs for students. It needs to be continued. It needs to be invigorated. We need to talk to the people of the Middle East. We need to bring them here. We have to build bridges. And part of that would be my very important recommendation is we have not invested enough in the academic front, in the European side, in the academic front, on research into democracy and what works and doesn't work. And it's a shame. We should do better. And I think that, for example, if you look at credible institutions that have been created like Citizen Lab, that has done tremendous work on the Iranian internet censorship front, we're missing that in the European context. Credible research institutes, more funding for it. And the fourth recommendation that I have is one of the new phenomenons which becomes minted as Project Titus has also engulfed the European Union. What is Project Titus? We have a problem, we create projects. One of the problems that we do engage is that there's a new priority, let's say LGBT, and so we have a massive projects for LGBT, and then other projects are neglected, they're losing core funding, and I think this was highlighted by some of our Iranian colleagues. The fight for democracy is a long-term fight. It is possible to say that a fragmented, let's say, diasporic media support landscape for Iran is maybe not the best way to serve it, but then choose 2 or 3 institutions that you really think make a difference and continue their core funding. Because at the moment, all organizations that are active in the democracy development arena lack consistency of funding. They have to go through hoops every time and again, shift priorities and this and that. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Willems. Mr. Ben-Shamsi's technical problems are resolved. That's the good news. So please.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I thank the organizers for having me here. It's a great honor for me to speak in the European Parliament. So, as was said in the introduction, I'm a journalist and a press publisher from Morocco. I'm also the founder of a platform called freearabs.com. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. But I would like to start this talk by 2 anecdotes. The first anecdote happened to me in 2005. I was still a journalist in Morocco. And after the terrorist bombings that happened in London, there was a lot of talk in European and Western media about linking Islam to terrorism and how intertwined these two were. And I received that call from a producer of a TV show in the channel Arte that you might very well know here in Europe. It's a French-German channel, which deems itself pretty intellectual. So this gentleman told me that they were airing a debate, Thema, maybe you know that show on Arte, about how Islam should not be conflated with terrorism, about had all the misconceptions that were going on in the West, that Islam is not a religion of terror, that it's rather a religion of peace and tolerance. And he told me, we checked out your magazines, we saw that you are pretty progressive, so we would like to invite you to our show so you can explain to our viewers that Islam is not a religion of terror, and is rather a religion of peace and tolerance, and etc. So my answer was, well, after thanking him for inviting me to his show, I said, as for Islam being a religion of peace and tolerance rather than a religion of terror, honestly, I can't tell. I don't know. I mean, Islam is, after all, bin Laden does speak arguments from the Quran, doesn't make them up. But on the other hand, you got this guy called Malik Shabel, he's an Algerian scholar, who wrote that book called the Islamic Kama Sutra. And then he wrote that other book called the Islamic Ontology for Wine. Both of them pick their arguments from Muslim culture. So my point was that Islam could be whatever you want it to be, just depending on the verses and the references you pick. So I told the guy, well, if I come to your show, it will be to request the right to be defined otherwise than through my assumed religion. And then he told me, but I'm confused. Are you not a Muslim? I started scratching my head. I said, okay, are you, I said, what's your name? He said his name was Paul. I said, okay, Paul, are you a Christian? And he was like, well, I'm French. I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, I used to go to church when I was a kid. My parents took me, but it's been a long time, so I just don't really care. Like, it's like a personal thing, you know. I said, okay, well, it's a personal feeling, right? So why do you assume that I don't have personal feelings? Just because my name is Ahmed, so you assume that I have a religion on my forehead, and you're Paul and you don't have that? Why? Why would you be different than me? I mean, freedom of conscience is a universal human right, right? And I'm a member of the universe as well, just like you. So why do you just call me a Muslim without even asking me? That's not right. Well, I usually explain this, what happened between me and Paul, with a string of pictures. Basically, Paul was giving me the choice of either identifying to this version of Islam, like being the bad Muslim, or this version of Islam, like they're much nicer and cuter and peaceful, etc. But what I like to identify to this is this. This picture was taken in a festival that happens once a year in Morocco. It's the festival of Essaouira. There's a lot of music going on. It's like Woodstock stuff, you know, people smoking joints and dancing in the street. This happens in a Muslim country as well. And why would I not be given the choice to identify to this type of people? So basically my point to Paul was that all of these things are, again, universal human rights, freedom of conscience. Don't patronize me. Don't assume that because my name is Ahmed, I should be the target of some kind of cultural relativism or Orientalism. Just deem me the same rights as you do, and let me come to your freaking show and say that to your audience, that I'm as free as you are. Well, the end of the anecdote is that Paul didn't end up inviting me to his show, because I think my ideas were kind of outside of the box for him. So the second anecdote I would like to tell, this is quite revealing for the rest of what I'm going to say. The second anecdote happened to me in 2009. I was, again, a journalist in Morocco, and I was invited by the American ambassador for some reception. And we were chatting about, the situation of press freedom in Morocco, and I was explaining how bad it was. And the ambassador told me, but, I mean, I don't understand. You should feel lucky. You know, if you were in Syria, you would be in jail probably, or you receive a bullet in your head. And so freedom, I mean, yeah, Morocco is a relatively free place. Why are you complaining? I told him, Mr. Ambassador, what do you expect me to do? Wake up every morning and rejoice because I'm not Syrian? I mean, I do live in Morocco, and I have problems because I'm a journalist here, and I'm being sued like all of the time, and my newspaper is banned. So what is this relativism vision of yours? I'm telling you about the real problems we have here. The guy, I was just talking to deaf ears. So the reason why I brought up these two anecdotes is just to show that when it comes to democracy and human rights promotion in the Arab world, the Western vision, mainstream Western vision, either come from the US or the EU, is often, it's what this journalist Michael Gerson called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I've heard that this morning in the first panel about, there's not a big readiness in the Arab world to stomach democratic and liberal values. It's, a pure approach of democracy wouldn't exactly help in the Arab world. Tolerance may not sound the same in New York and in Saudi Arabia. Cultural relativism. I say it's not a good approach. And I say that we should focus on the Arab vanguard, and there is one, that those who promote these values, as the values of democracy and human rights and liberalism, just as they are, universal values. Well, of course, the first argument I would get is how little is this, how many of these people do exist? I mean, yeah, there might be people who defend universal human rights in the Arab world, but how many? Seriously, they're not the majority, right? You're just a fringe minority. You can't speak for the people. Well, my answer is very simple. This fringe minority started the Arab Spring. Everywhere in the Arab world, the most spectacular paradigm shift that happened in Arab politics for half a century was started by this fringe minority. So liberal activists and people who genuinely defend universal human rights in the Arab world are to be reckoned with, and they have a very strong capacity to influence the people. Of course, history showed that since the Arab Spring, they were outplayed by whatever organized political force was out there, like the army in Egypt, the monarchies, wherever there's a monarchy, Islamist groups also, Muslim Brotherhood, etc. And it's pretty normal. I mean, you can't just impose yourself in a bid for power over people who have been preparing themselves for that for a century. You know, young Arab liberals, they might be very inspiring, but they don't have guns, they don't have money, they don't have grassroots organizations, they don't have all what it takes to impose yourself in a bid for in a competition for power. However, since we're talking about communication, and that's our aim today, change is not always something that happens at the political level. It's also, and arguably more importantly, on the social level, and on changing the mentalities and changing the social values. And for that, we should trust that liberal vanguard that did the Arab Spring, that started the Arab Spring, that influenced Arab masses to do the spectacular rebellions in 2011. So not only is this liberal vanguard still alive, unlike what a lot of people think, because on the news you just see, Daesh and Sisi and whatever oppressive news they're out there. You don't hear about those guys anymore. Well, breaking news. Not only are they still alive, but they are very much influential and very active and inspiring. I'm going to show you some numbers very quickly. This is a story that I just published by the Middle East Institute. If this thing works. Yes, it does. Okay, here are the numbers. Just a couple numbers. Egypt is often exemplified, is often quoted as exemplifying, where is it? Oops. Here. As exemplifying, the post-revolutionary vanishing of liberal opinion leaders. Just look at Twitter in Egypt. 7 out of the 10 most followed Twitter accounts in Egypt are those of liberal commentators. Either satirists like Bassem Youssef, or Bilal Fadl, or secular politicians like Mohammed al-Barad'i, Hamdin Sabahi, Amr Hamzawi. 7 out of the 10. Saudi Arabia, let's go to the extreme range. I mean, it's arguably the most conservative and Islamic countries on the planet. Well, YouTube is very strong in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you're aware of that, but per capita, it's the country in the world where the connection to YouTube is the highest. Well, out of the 10 most followed YouTube channels, 6 are those of satirical shows produced by rebellious youth groups. And I did the math. By November 2014, that was just last month, the total views of videos uploaded by these channels were 915 million views in a country of 30 million people. Don't ever tell me that liberals do not have leverage anymore in the Arab world. I could give you more numbers and go on, but I don't want to bore you with that. My key point is that the US and the EU want to promote democratic values in the Arab world? Good. Well, do not ask yourself how you will market it to unprepared audiences, because that's a self-defeating question and self-defeating strategy. Just trust, help, support, and empower the locals who already do that. And there are a lot of people who do that on an everyday basis and do that pretty efficiently. Since this is a practical session about solutions and can-dos, I'm going to show you an example. Well, I'm sorry if it's a bit self-serving, because it's the platform I'm running, freearabs.com. But I think it's a good example, though, about Arab, activists and liberals. So this is a platform that was created last year, and the idea was to bring together many of those liberal activists who started the Arab Spring dynamics. Here we go. So what is this platform? As written here, it's a group of free-minded bloggers, journalists, and activists based in the Middle East, North Africa, and the rest of the world, keen on perpetuating the democratic spirit of the Arab Spring. We confront both autocrats and extremists with audacious reporting and whistleblowing, daring, opinion writing, and creative, edgy artwork. And we are a community of about 500 bloggers, activists, and every day we're getting bigger, coming from all over the Arab world, advocating values such as, this is our statement of mission. We fight authoritarianism and corruption, advocate free election and open government, and champion civil rights. Speech, thought, opinion, belief, expression, all freedoms are our friend. Baseline, Arabs too are worthy of universal human rights, and like what Paul thought. And we're fun. That's also, since we're asking ourselves how to reach out to those people, well, there's no mystery. I mean, modern media have been invented quite a long time ago, and there's no mystery. If you want to reach out to people, you have to be attractive. You have to have, like, glowing pictures, colors, do fun stories. Of course, we cover a wide range of topics. Just a quick survey of this week's topics. This is a testimony of a girl who explains how she broke out of Islam, because that is possible in the Arab world, even though very little people think it's possible. Also, from the other side, this is a vision of this Islamist lady who's a journalist in Tunisia who explains the deeds of Al-Nahda, the Islamist Tunisian party, from the inside. Lots of stories, journalism under assault in Yemen. This is a story about stop sanctifying people of religion, kafa min taqdis rijal din, etc. I mean, we have a lot of story. I don't want to bore you. This is a coming out, a story of a young lesbian woman who came out to her father, and it's still possible, and her father supports her. This is happening in what people call the Islamic world. And who talks about that? So a lot of topics like this. And so we cover politics, society, art, ideas, fun. I want to show you something about fun. Since we're talking about how to communicate efficiently with people, well, humor, satire, fun content has always been a great tool. My colleague Alex mentioned Bassem Youssef, who's a tremendous hit in the Arab world, because he just makes politics what it often deserves to be, which is a mockery. And humor and satire is a very effective way to challenge the status quo and change the mentalities. I want to show you this section that we created, Free Arabs. It's called the Horrific Four. You know the Fantastic Four, right? The superheroes. So we said that, okay, there are preconceptions in conservative and traditional culture in the Arab world that some type of characters are not very well accepted in traditional mentality. So we call them the Horrific Four. And here they are, the nightmare of decent family people. The independent woman, the homosexual, the atheist, and the Jew. And guess what? A lot of them do exist in the Arab world, except no one talks about them. So in this form of satire and mockery, we gave the floor and a platform to actual independent women, homosexuals, atheists, and Jews living in the Arab world to explain just their own vision of the story, etc. I just want to show you a 1-minute clip about satire, since you're talking about it. This is a brilliant show that was done by some Syrian members of our network, Syrian activists. It's called Keeping Holy Warriors Clean. There's no subtitles. It's 1 minute long, but I think I can translate it. So it's a fake advertisement. You know this one? So it's basically... She said, after every explosion, my husband comes up and he's got a lot of blood on his clothes. And there is no, powder that can take off all the blood on his clothes. So what's the solution? So Daik is a play on word on Daesh, ISIS. And he says, we have this miracle powder called Daik, and you should just use it on your clothes. See? Take a white cloth, put a little of ink on it, a little of blood, and then you rinse it with Daik with the explosive effect. And for the lovers of suicide attacks, there is a bigger box with a more economic price. No, we didn't. No. I wish we could. I mean, if we had more funds, we would produce stuff like that. So this was to show you while the West and Europe, and I will wrap up with that, are wondering how can we teach democratic values and liberal values in the Arab world, this is happening. And a lot of stuff like this is happening. So my answer again is, don't teach anything. They know how to do that. Just support those who do it already. Well, and to finish, some would tell me, well, this side is in English. Well, it's not exactly in English. It's, a lot of it is in Arabic. So, but we put it in English for simple reasons, because we believe that the funding and the kickstarting must be Western funds, because unfortunately few people are willing to financially support us to start with. But we have high ambitions for this platform to make it in 3 versions, in Arabic, in English, and in French, because it's relevant in the Maghreb as well. And there are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people who would, recognize themselves in such things because they come from inside Arabic societies. So my last point is that don't tell me or yourself anymore that Arabs are not ready for democratic or liberal values. They are way more than you can believe. You just need to identify those people who are doing this already in the Arab world. And I'm happy to help with that, by the way, because I know a lot of them. And help them, support them. They need a lot of help. They need a lot of support. This what you saw here, has been done with almost no funds, just a labor of love and people coming together. But there are thousands of initiatives. I want to end to show you a last one, something that happens. Oh, this is a great artist to enlighten. Since we're talking about Islam, this is the Kaaba, and it illustrates how religion is more of a Rubik's Cube than you could expect. And one last thing to end with is that happened in Lebanon recently. I don't know if you heard about that. There was this Lebanese athlete called Jackie Shamoun. She was a skier. She participated in the Olympics. And apparently she posed for a calendar. I mean, she had like more or less erotic pictures. Not exactly naked, but still sexy. And there was an outcry in Lebanon about, that she shamed the country by posing like that. And at the same time, there was a case of violence against women. So there was this very, smart group in Lebanon who did this. Where is it? Here. Yeah. They had this poster. What shocks you more? Violence against women or nudity? They launched this campaign, and then there was a fantastic response by average Lebanese citizens. And they launched a campaign. It's called I'm Not Naked. Strip for Jackie. Jackie was the athlete. And you saw pictures like this. I'm not naked. I'm a product designer. I'm a radiographer. I'm a drummer. I'm free. I'm a writer. I'm a photographer. Look at Arab people. Is it what you usually think they are? I'm a project manager. Oh, a minority? Really? No, they're not. Because people like that, they started in Lebanon and elsewhere in the Arab world. They were at the forefront of the protests in 2011. They were joined later by larger groups. But they initiated the larger magnitude and larger scale paradigm change that ever happened in the Arab world. And cultural changes are still started by minorities, but then it can end up to revolutions. This is how liberalism happened in the rest of the Arab world. And I will let you watch this picture, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shamsi. It's wonderful to hear that maybe there isn't such a difficult work in communicating those values. They already exist. You just have to empower them. We are a bit short of time, so we'll turn to the audience immediately and just reserve 1 minute wrap-up for each of the panel members. So please, with your questions. Mr. Mostafi.
Very shortly, just 2 small questions to Mr. Ben Shams. You said that the U.S. and EU will impose the democracy to the Arab world.
No, I didn't say that.
So, misunderstanding. Excuse me. Another point was that your information and explanation about the different degree of tolerance in the Arab world was very instructive, and thank you very much. That was very constructive. But about the obstacles in front of the progress of democracy in the Arab world, we cannot not to observe one major contradiction between the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights and the text of the Quran. Interpretation, yes, there are many. But as you know better than I do, the Quran is not changeable. difference between Christianity and Islam is that in Christianity you have 4 Bibles, and these 4 Bibles are written by 4 people. 2 of them have never met Jesus. And that's their receipt about what Jesus did and said. So everybody can contest it. Where comes, for example, Protestantism come from? In Islam, there's just only one text, without a comma difference between the Quran in Indonesia or in Senegal. And this Quran has in some points contradictory with the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, mainly on equality between Muslims and non-Muslims, equality between non-Muslims, already, inequality between men and women, slavery, brutal punishments, etc. These cannot be not to be seen as an obstacle for democracy. Thank you.
Of course they are an obstacle to should I answer the question? Of course they're an obstacle to democracy. No one is denying that. But I think we have a different vantage point on this. I'm assuming, I might be wrong, that when you mention the Quran as having all these major impediments to democratic and human rights culture, you assume that it's the unchangeable law of the lands everywhere and that it's ingrained in the minds of everyone in the Arab world. That's where we differ. Because, I mean, Christianity is arguably no less tolerant than Islam. You know, when it was the law of the land in Europe a couple of centuries ago, it was pretty harsh over here. You know, and the solution was very clear. It's secularism. It's just separating church from state and then letting the religious scholars debate about what religion is about till the end of time, but letting positive and objective rules rule the people. This is exactly what should be implemented in the Arab world. And then we should, I mean, I would not really be sure that Islam is as immutable as you say and that the Quran cannot be interpreted in different ways. But you know what? I'm not really concerned with that. I think this is a matter for religious scholars. It does not concern me. As an Arab citizen, I just want to be ruled by secular laws. And then, if I want to be religious, good for me. But if I don't want, I'm protected by the law. This is what thousands of activists in the Arab world, and tens of thousands even, are craving for and doing activism for every day in the Arab world. So we're in the wrong box here. Rather than discussing what Islam allows or does not allow, let's discuss whether Islam should be the defining rule. And if we settle that it's not, then fine. Let the religious conversation continue, but it's not our concern anymore.
I repeat what I said in the first panel. Please mention your name and say who the question is addressed to. Mr. Goldreich.
My name is Hassan Shariat Badawi, an opposition activist from Iran. I have a question from sir. What's your proposal for networking democratic forces within the community?
Microphone.
Yes, from the beginning. My name is Hassan Shariat Nadawi, a political activist from Iran. And my question is, what is your proposal for networking the democratic forces? Because the communicating the values is not enough. The anti-democratic forces is well equipped and well networked. What's your proposal? All in the.
Is it a question for me? Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not Marx or Lenin here. I don't have like a ready recipe for how to bring together political forces, create a union and consensus, and then transform the political landscape. Obviously, democratic forces need to unite and gather and organize. And this is something that will happen over time when the consciousness has grown enough that liberal and democratic values is what is needed by the people. For now, what I believe is that too many people still believe that these values are alien to the Arab and the quote-unquote Muslim world. And therefore, there is a lot of that self-defeating, feeling and twist in the minds of Arab liberals themselves. like someone said in the audience, yeah, these values do exist, but they're defended by a tiny minority of people. This is a misconception that is very widely shared, including in the minds of unfortunately, a lot of liberals and Democrats. And as long as they have that in their mind, they won't start the necessary work of not only spreading it, but also organizing and uniting around it and doing whatever a successful political force should do in order to prevail in a competition for power. So my view, and it's modestly only my view, I think it's what the French call mettre la charrue avant les bœufs. I don't know how to translate this in English. The cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart. I think that we should put the horse before the cart, and I mean by that the values before the organization that carry those values. The liberal and democratic values in the Arab world, as the more they spread, and the wider the potential constituencies for such a coalition that you're talking about. So I think that, or maybe it's because I'm a journalist that I'm saying that, or an activist, and we should start by doing stuff like this, either Free Arabs or other initiatives like this, and spread the liberal values as much as we can. And when we are able to show tens of millions of visitors and clicks on our website and people who embrace our values, then, you know, necessity, a lot of things are often born out of necessity. When it is obvious that there is a huge audience for such values and such principles, then politicians will start to cater to these people and build pressure groups. I think it's just a matter of time, and we won't have to wait very long for that. Maybe less than a generation. 24 years ago, at 24 years, that's usually what a generation is assumed to last. I think it would take less than that.
Mr. Goldrees.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, dear panelists. I really enjoyed different visions of communicating democratic values. I have very briefly, two questions to Mr. Williams and Mr. Gladstein, to be concretely about the panelists. You said that the change must come from inside out. And it's very important to support the locals, as you were saying, local activists. One of the trends I have seen the last couple of years significantly in Europe, and you were mentioning some of the projects, I would also add BBC Persian as one of them, is to support, let's say, the moderates and the reformists inside the countries, those who seem to be democratic and having liberal democratic values, but in the base they are more loyalist to the constitution of an undemocratic system. Those projects has been going on for a couple of years. I was wondering, why hasn't been a true support for these radical liberal democrats as Mr. Benchemsi was explaining, the real liberal democrats in those countries, in those systems, instead of supporting this kind of moderates or reformists who would change the country or the system from inside out?
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm sorry.
What I actually try to say is that what I see as a trend in the past few years is that projects like Zamaneh in the first years and BBC Persian at this moment, they are supporting the voice of the moderates and the reformists who are loyalists to the constitution of an undemocratic system. Why there is less support for the seculars and the real liberal democrats, who are more in favor of universal declaration of human rights?
I'm not sure if I support your observation. So I don't think that Zamaneh supports or is loyalist to an undemocratic constitution. I think that the success of Zamaneh is basically rooted in its approach to give voice to people inside Iran. It's doing that in a dialogue type of version. It's quite successful, basically emphasizing some of the things that I was saying. If you look at both the Stringer network, but also at the number of people that approach this project, you see that in still almost 50% of all approaches are coming from inside Iran, and I think that penetration and coverage is one of the most important aspects. I would also like to stress that while Free Press Unlimited initiated Radio Zamaneh, it is currently an independent project. It has its own board. It's run by Iranians. But I'm sure that if you have any concerns, I would be more than willing to talk to you about it. But I'm not aware of any kind of political stance of that institution that concurs with what you are saying.
Just a brief comment. You're throwing a lot of terms here around like reformist and progressives and things like that. I think it might be more useful in this context when we're looking at European policymakers who are trying to invest in and potentially look at different ways of reaching people in the Middle East. Let's actually take a more granular look and look at actual specific projects as opposed to labeling them with big, huge terms. Let's look at the Women to Drive movement in Saudi Arabia. Let's look at a comic book creator in Jordan. I think that's kind of what I'm saying. Let's look at what Ahmed's doing in Morocco. That sort of thing I think would be very useful here.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think that my organization stands for good journalism. And good journalism is also about trying to understand and trying to report on what those people who are maybe adverse to your own version of the truth are saying, because they are, to a certain extent, and I think definitely in the Iranian context, they are important. The anti-democratic forces run Iran. So it would be a bit strange to not to report on what they are saying and they are thinking. It's about good journalism. So I think professional journalism should always try to look into those people, and that goes back to something I said before in terms of a culture of pluralism. I think that we will not get very far if we want to create democratic debate and democratic values in the Middle East by telling in our selection of people that we put on stage, saying only those things that we like, right?
Dr. Amullah.
First, I would like to support at least the implicit proposal by Mr. Bin Shamsi regarding the funding. I fully agree that in the Arab world today, in different countries to different degrees, not at the same level, that money should be shifting from the traditional media-oriented initiatives to the more creative ideas that you have presented. I think you have done a very good selling pitch in this, but I would like to caution and warn that while it was a lot of fun, I enjoyed it myself, it's only partial and very partial, that it differs tremendously between one country and the other, and that any serious approach to the spread of democracy has to be much more multidimensional. But I concur that one immediate thing that could be done is reallocation of money from the traditional media-oriented initiatives to the more creative ones. Thank you.
Well, with that, we are running out of time, so I'd ask the panelists each to take 1 minute and encapsulate their final wrap-up and take. And we'll start just in order from the left. Mr. Willems, please.
Yes, I think that I have not much to add to you. I think that while I concur with what Mr. Munia is saying, as I said, the multidimensional approach, engaging research and the academic community into democracy research, I think it is important to see that if we look worldwide, funding for media development, and in my book, media is not newspapers, dead trees, or broadcast only. It is everything It encapsulates bloggers, it encapsulates new media, it encapsulates everything. Funding for media development is shrinking worldwide. It is a 0.03% of global assistance to democracy. It's nothing. It's peanuts, and it's shrinking. So rather than saying we should shift media development money from the traditional media to the new media, I would argue we would make a combined effort to make this sliver bigger. And this is true in the United States as it is in the European Union. And I think that that is a problem in which we have a common cause rather than a divisive force. So that would be my recommendation, and I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Grafstein.
Yeah, I think my final parting thought to leave you with is that do not underestimate artists, creatives, and entrepreneurs. They're disruptive forces which are going to be changing the countries that they're working out of. It's kind of amazing that entrepreneurship was not mentioned really at all in the first session and hasn't really been a bigger focus here. I think that that's a really great angle for European policymakers to be looking at as they decide how to spend money in efforts to achieve democratic change in places like the Middle East or elsewhere around the world. Investing in local media entrepreneurs who have very little support and who might be embattled, I think is going to be essential. And these are the people who are creating a new landscape of commentary, of culture and discussion, and assistance and solidarity and support with them, I think, is vital. So thank you all.
Mr. Shamsi.
Okay. Well, first, thank you, Mr. Munya, for supporting my fundraising campaign. I'm happy to follow up after this talk. If you oh, well, thanks a lot. That was not my first purpose, but thank you. As for, you said that what I showed was fun, and I thank you for that comment. But if we want a more serious approach, fun is not enough, and we should consider the variety between different countries. Well, I have two comments for that. First thing is that fun is very serious. And as Alex just said, creative dissent and art and satire and humor are way more serious channels that a lot of people could imagine. Whenever Bassem Youssef is on TV, 40 million people tune in. 40 million. I challenge you to give me any serious politician or activist who has a bigger constituency than this. So fun and humor are very serious matters and are, I think, more powerful levers than many political actions to change the readiness of people to accept democracy and human rights. As for diversity in the countries, when you say that it's diverse, it's different from one country to another, I assume that the underlying assumption is that in more conservative countries, people are not as open-minded as this. I would not pose naked with a poster saying, I am free or whatever. I disagree. Just look closer. You have, atheist Saudi activists are wild. You have no idea. Gay rights activists in Saudi Arabia, there is such a thing. And they are wild as well. Just look closer. Look at the details. Universal human rights and values are defended universally in the Arab world by lots of people who could be very influential if they are given the means to be so. And social change and change of mentalities always starts with empowering a vanguard. That's what we're talking about here.
Mr. Allen.
Just one thing. I don't want to spread party, but being, a follower of Twitter, the number of tweets and so on doesn't show anything. Personally, I follow a lot of ISIS tweets. It doesn't make me a Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi follower. I think it happened to Iranian case too. Many people look at blogs, and they were liberal blogs, and they say it's representative of Iranian youth, and then it turned out it was completely different. Concerning Iranian case and political discussion and issues, I think it's not at all attractive when it comes to the big questions like let's create a new constitution, or how we make Iran more democratic. It doesn't attract people. I think we should go through different pieces of puzzle and bring small groups together one by one. For example, we should go local, in my opinion. Just look at the cases, like how people, are sensitive about, garbage in their neighborhood, how they can make their mayor and municipality accountable for that. And then, how other people react in other regions about that, and they can be connected to one objective. and one by one they can construct. We cannot even talk about democracy. It's completely useless. We can talk about very concrete issues like environment, corruption in that city and the neighborhood, and bring different people together. And Europe has not only a lot to share by its own experience, but I think it has a moral responsibility to do that. Thank you.
On that note, thank you very much for a rich discussion, the different perspectives, but all of it, I think, came together. We don't have much time, so I thank the second panel, and I invite our dear guest, Mr. Silvio Gonzalo, to join me up here. Are you going to speak from down there? Okay. Then, thank you. If you want to, you can. I will proceed to my part, which is sort of a summation and suggestions about steps ahead. Sometimes people in the field forget the importance of what they're doing, the greater importance. We get bogged down in technicalities. I would like to say that the issue we are discussing today, communicating democratic and human rights values of Europe to the Middle East, but not only Middle East, other closed societies, is the 21st century war, one that cannot afford to lose. September 2014 was a rude awakening for many world leaders who had got accustomed to the delusion of unipolarity after the Cold War. The good guys have won, the bad guys have been eliminated. It's just a question of time before they join us. The month began with the NATO summit, which changed the organization from a collective security to a collective defense, actually defending borders, Baltic states, Poland. And it ended with the summit in the United Nations, where a principal topic was things like the Islamic State gobbling up huge parts of Iraq and Syria. And the realization set in that, no, we do have enemies. Open societies do have enemies. And they're powerful, and in many cases, they're succeeding. Matt Barrows of U.S. National Intelligence Council, that sits on top of the 16 intelligence organizations in the U.S., did a study, Global Trends 2030, further bad news for open societies, that power is shifting away from them, further to the east. Now, if you can't win that battle now, it's going to be a lot harder in 2030. And if you don't win that battle now and the trend continues, so will the dysfunctional state of large swaths of territory, not just the Middle East, from deep Africa to the gates of India. And one recent study suggested that you would have 600 million people having to move because of economic despair. If 15% of them head to Europe, you have a 90 million immigration problem that's larger than the size of the population of Germany. It's already beginning to create problems. There are parts of Malmö, Sweden, where a white policewoman cannot walk for fear of Islamist gangs. And the mayor changes a sports club to sexual segregation. And in support of the votes of those new immigrants, he says if Jews don't like it, they can go back to Israel. This is in liberal Sweden, in Malmö, 20 minutes train ride from Copenhagen. That invites a reaction. The reaction is a neo-racist party that has grown from 7% to 13%, now last count 17.5% in polls. And it's become the arbiter and decision maker between the two flanks in the Swedish parliament, and has, as of today, made Sweden ungovernable, a major country. Now you can think of UKIP in the UK, you can think of Madame Marine Le Pen in France. So you're seeing how the spiral is working. The other side is succeeding very well in communicating its values inside democratic societies, driving one side to strengthen the hard rights, and the hard rights actions aggravates that process, and the spiral goes up. This is a real threat. When we talk about the European Parliament, where we are sitting, gradually increasing deputies who are against the very concept of a Europe, a united Europe. That is a concern, and we cannot afford to let this trend continue. But why have we failed? If Iran and China block internet, satellite broadcasts, it's natural their closed societies are afraid of open communication. But on the Arab networks, television and internet, on the Russian language networks that are open and free, how come enemies of open societies are beating the daylight out of the values of open societies? There are wonderful things happening, of course, in the Arab world, as Mr. Ben-Shamsi said. But I followed 10 radical Arab channels and looked at how their messages are transmitted and repeated inside mosques at the heart of London, heart of UK. They are doing something which we should be doing. They are looking at a two-step flow of communication, not just mass media, not just one-to-many communication, but community building, communities that are the key to transmitting values. Wilbur Schramm, the first person called a theorist of communication, and later the person who set up the first degree programs with the university degree programs with the name communication in it, said you can impart information, but you cannot change attitudes and deep values unless there is a second step to the flow of communication. I think Western societies have understood this less than totalitarians and authoritarians. Mao used that. He could have had very cheap shortwave radios for everybody to listen to his speeches, but he wanted to have them blared out of megaphones in the center of communes so that the party would engage the people in the discussion and deepen and implant the values. That is what those imams in the mosques in UK are doing. How do we do that? Fred Andon is an expert in doing that sort of thing. We have to take all of the activity which already exists in closed societies, as Mr. Ben-Shamsi said, but it's in a state of fluff. It's not something solid. It's vapor. It comes and goes. It can pull down authority. It's proven in Egypt, Tunisia, but it cannot resurrect authority in its stead. Where is Wael Ghanem today? Where are all of those brave people in Al-Tahrir? Are they really playing a role in shaping Egyptian politics? Even in Tunisia? No. Why not? Because they haven't built a community. A community is something more durable. Extension of public diplomacy, which cannot do the job because it comes, as many of the speakers said, from governments and policymakers, and therefore they're mistrusted and their message is taken as propaganda. And language services, BBC, Radio Farda, which are doing a magnificent job, and if anybody doubts that they do a great job, they should listen to Václav Havel, who impeached President Clinton. Don't shut this off, because that was our source of news and information in the Cold War years, and we need it again. But again, it's not enough unless it's plugged into and complemented by communities that are cultivated on the net. There are techniques of doing this. We shouldn't get too excited about quantitative measures. Old indexing worked that way. Now search engine optimization is also looking at ways of looking at quality of communication, how much stickiness, how much persistence, how much moving of messages and communication peer-to-peer in the third leg of communication, and stabilizing that into communities. And I agree with Mr. Ben Shamsi, don't underestimate the quality of activists in closed societies who want to build those communities. Women's rights, labor rights, entrepreneur networks, ethnic rights, which includes diversity, respect for diversity, and pluralism. All of these have passionate adherence to those values inside closed communities. And if we develop communities which have one side straddle the divide between open and closed societies, not government-to-people communication, but people-to-people communication, but supported by governments, and build those pipelines so that these communities that have advanced and have lots of great examples of how problems that beset people in closed societies, problems of injustice, poverty, are resolved in open societies. How answerability, transparency makes the life of an entrepreneur, the life of a woman, the life of a member of labor, a much better experience. How these values have ended centuries of war and poverty in Europe. I think if we can do that, if that could become an agenda for Europe to cultivate communities of values, then we have a chance of winning this war. Otherwise, whenever you have a war of values between values of open societies and closed societies, if one side is sure about the values and passionate about it, and the other side is not, guess who's going to win? Thank you very much. And now we turn to our dear guest, Mr. Silvio Gonzalo. I don't think that he needs introduction, but the democracy and human rights work of the Foreign Action Service, which is really the foreign ministry of the European Union, we can call it that, is in his good hands, and we are honored to have him. Mr. Gonzalo.
Thank you for your kindness. It's actually an honor for me to be here, and in the program it talks about closing remarks. For me, it's more like a reaction to what was said in this panel. For me, it was very informative and very useful, especially at the time when we are in the process of identifying, together with our new leadership, what should be our priorities for the next mandate, the next 5 years, in the light of the challenges which are emerging around the world. So for me, it was extremely interesting to hear the views both of people come from the ground, who have direct experience of what happens in our neighborhood, and also from those who are actors inside the EU and see maybe how the EU works and call for improvement in the way in which we operate. Of course, I had a speech, but I'm going to just keep it in mind, but try more to react to what was said. I think that the first thing I wanted to say is that I was pleased to hear that many panelists put emphasis on the need to empower local actors, because that's one of the messages that we have put in an internal reflection paper that we have shared with our leadership, because we see that more and more as the way forward. A lot of emphasis was placed up until now on, let's say, interact with institutions and strengthening institutions, but I think we've forgotten in the process the actors on the ground. And the emphasis that was put, for example, on the fact that only local actors can have the legitimacy, credibility and trust to talk about democratic values, I think it's a proof that we are going in the right direction. So the initial ideas of the EU or EP funding directly, or managing even some kind of broadcasting structure that would deliver messages to our neighborhood countries, I think is something that I was allergic from the very start, and I'm even more allergic now, so I'm comforted in that respect. And the idea of us focusing more on supporting the creation of platforms and providing also activists with the skills that they need, possibly with a lot of emphasis on peer-to-peer kind of interaction rather than sort of, top-down support, I think is an important message that I will take back with me and share with the colleagues in the European Commission. Somebody mentioned DG we are, very closely cooperating with them, so I think these kind of messages are important to bring back. I also think that the emphasis on empowering local actors allows us also to be more flexible, to more responsive, to be more attentive to what are the local needs and the local requirements and conditions. I think there's no recipe that fits all the situations that we've been discussing. We've talked about Egypt, we talked about Iran. They're very different cases in my view. And this doesn't mean that we are forgetting, that we're falling into this trap of relativism, that we say that values are not universal, not at all. But I think the values are the same as, bloggers testify. We see that, when in certain dialogues we have with countries which are, let's say, less receptive to our messages, when we have dialogues with them, their reply is that, your values are not necessarily our values. You should put them in our context. We are not as developed as Europe. We might be 100 years back, etc., etc. I tend to retort that this is not the reality. They just need to listen to their own people. However, I think the emphasis varies from country to country. And if I have to make a reproach to ourselves, is that perhaps in our interaction and in our discourse, when we talk about democracy, we placed perhaps too much emphasis on political and civic rights and forgotten a little bit also social and economic rights. In a country like Egypt, for example, I think it does matter that democracy is seen not simply as a system that, produces or guarantees equality between different between gender equality or equality for LGBTI people or so on and so forth, or democracy being simply identified with the discourse on what kind of constitution we should have, but it should also be seen as the best system that can allow people to participate in the decisions which are taken and which have an impact on their lives. And I think that we should perhaps try to pass that message as well, because too little was said. And I remember listening sometimes to activists coming from Tunisia saying, you know, you're just concentrating on the discussion on the constitution, but there's people who actually also want jobs, and they don't see the benefits of all this. You know, they don't see the benefits of the revolution in terms also of the quality of their life. And we should make them understand that democracy is also the best way of promoting development, economic growth, and stable economic growth and prosperity. Somebody talked about, it was Alex, I think, talked about also not forgetting artists and creatives. It's kind of weird how sometimes there are coincidences in life. I was reading just now a report from one of our delegations, one of our embassies abroad, that they were trying to organize for, today is Human Rights Day, they were trying to organize for Human Rights Day an event involving artists and using the topic of artistic freedom as a way of, approaching the issue of freedom of expression, etc., and how the authorities banned this event. So they were quite aware of the implications that sometimes, artistic events can have. And I think that, in a way, although it's a negative example, confirms that we should use all channels, including these, to promote these kind of initiatives. I was also pleased to hear that there was not the usual emphasis only on public diplomacy, on sanctioning, but also on the need to, and against this approach that we Europe are the good and the others are the bad, and therefore we teach ex cathedra what the others should be doing, because we have some very difficult cases. People talked about the deteriorating situation globally, and that's absolutely true. And it's visible not just in terms of statistics, journalists killed, or laws which are being adopted which are restrictive in terms of NGO activities, in terms of access to internet, etc. It's also true in multilateral fora. You quoted the situation in the Human Rights Council, where we still managed, however, through intensive outreach to pass important messages. However, it is true that, let's say, those countries which do not share our values are becoming more and more vocal and more organized. So we definitely, in my view, have to change attitude. The policy of sanctioning, and there I turn also to Marietje, because sometimes I see this very much in resolutions passed by this institution, the policy of kind of sanctioning and dictating in a very peremptory fashion to partner countries what they should do and what they should not do, I think can be very counterproductive. We have to say clearly when violations occur, but maybe we have to find a way also of engaging, and the idea is that we should engage with youth organizations, we keep channels open at academic level, expert level. This is something that we have in mind very, very much in case of dialogues we have with countries. Well, I won't single out countries, because if you single out one, then the others will say, why do you single out me and not so-and-so? Just one additional element. We have some guidelines on freedom of expression, which are, in my view, you mentioned them, Marietje. They're very detailed, and I think they're quite comprehensive, and they foresee practical measures for addressing violations of freedom of expression, preventing violations of freedom of expression, and supporting developments that enhance freedom of expression. The critical phase we are in now, and that's going to be very much the emphasis in the years to come, is on implementing them. And I think that's something that we are particularly aware of, and that's why only last week we organized a forum here in Brussels with NGOs from all over the world with the specific topic of freedom of expression online and offline. I agree very much with what you were saying about also us being credible and having the legitimacy to interact with partners on democracy and human rights issues only if we sort ourselves out internally. And I think that's very much another topic that we want to put on the table. I have to say that the new structure of the Commission, the Juncker Commission, in my view, will help in that respect, because it really tries to break the compartmentalization that existed in the previous Commission between different policies. There really is an effort to create clusters, and there also is the role of Timmermans, your co-citoyen, who has really an overview of everything which comes out of the Commission in terms of its compatibility with the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which I think is a pretty good text. We only need to apply it. So the idea of having internal mechanisms of, we have already the Fundamental Rights Agency, which is doing an excellent job. We just need to operationalize what the Fundamental Rights Agency does. Because it's absolutely true. Whenever we go and, you know, we have human rights dialogues with over 40 countries a year. I've chaired now a few. And it is obvious that our partners, as I said, they're becoming bolder, and therefore they challenge us and they tell us, you know, well, what, you know, you're asking me to why we've adopted this kind of law. Well, you know, one of your member states, or more than one, have adopted legislation which places more emphasis on security rather than freedom. And I totally agree with you that already the language of saying striking a balance between security and freedom is the wrong approach, because you can't put freedom and security on the same scales. Yeah, you need both, exactly. Reinvigorating the EU digital agenda, that's for sure, because I agree that if we talk about means of communication, and I don't see them as us building or developing the means of communicating our values to partner countries, but us supporting local actors develop the means of communication that they need in order to, you know, create a pluralistic environment and allow the population in that country to have access to different information and not just, you know, information coming from the authorities. So the digital agenda is something that we really need to work on in the context of our human rights and democracy action plan. You said we shift priorities, and this results in gap of funding. We had an example recently. It's very difficult for me to comment on that, in the sense that our effort now for the next years to come is to make a clear distinction between those areas where we have consolidated working methods and where people work together, where there is synergy, where you know, the different stakeholders are fully committed and have made that part and parcel of their work, and concentrate our action on those areas where we see that not all the stakeholders are playing ball, or where there are new challenges, or where we didn't manage to, you know, achieve the objectives that we wanted to achieve. So the idea is to focus, but you know very well that when you are in a process of consultation, when you have different stakeholders, when you have 28 member states and you have the European Parliament, the final result might not be as focused as you wanted. And it's very difficult afterwards to choose, you know, in terms of, I'm thinking about the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, which has different thematic strands, you know, to choose which one takes priority. We have to have a serious debate also with the Parliament on this, I think. But I take your point. This projectitis is something that we should be fighting. Just one final thing. I take a point that, you know, if you look at blogs, if you look at tweets, you know, who are the most popular people that are followed, the most popular tweeters are followed in Egypt, for example. No, followed in absolute terms. I don't think that is necessarily an indicator of the prevailing view in a country. I mean, it can be, but we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because we should also bear in mind that perhaps there are also class barriers in these countries. And that when we talk about social media, we reach a certain portion of the population, but not also in terms of age, in terms of economic background, etc., in terms of urban versus rural. So I think we have to be conscious of that, and we should try to develop ways of reaching out and being relevant also to those actors. And I'll stop at that. Sorry, it was a bit random, but...
Thank you. I'm going to sit here so I can see you better. I'm sorry to keep you a bit longer because I know we're running over time. But on this Human Rights Day, I particularly want to thank all the panelists, but also you all for coming together for this discussion. A few reminders and, I guess, key points that I take away. One is that millions of dollars don't always have similar impact or proportionate impact, and that public diplomacy is not the right avenue for engaging with people, and that certainly hearing voices is important, not just sending a message to people. Of course, that democracy is not alien to people in North Africa and the Middle East, that we do not have to teach anything. But what is a reality is that a lot of the brave voices, some of whom are unknown, may not have many Twitter followers at all, are targeted, and we have to think about ways to keep them safe in the broadest sense of the word. The diversity among people, the diversity among voices is already a reality, and the Internet has given more opportunity to amplify these voices, has provided alternative avenues for communications, and has broken through some traditional monopolies that have served propaganda well, but of course propaganda can also come through these new channels. Something important that I feel like we have to keep emphasizing is that unfortunately the lines between open and closed societies are not always so clear. And that has to do with the fact that too often security and freedom do become zero-sum, also in our democracies. And I think that particularly impacts the media. We've seen horrible examples in the United Kingdom, for example, of hard drives of a major newspaper being destroyed under the eyes of an intelligence service. So we really have to think about where we stand ourselves. Indeed, what I take away, and I think we should be reminded of in politics, where we always deal with the more boring and less sexy policies, that fun is important, and that there are so many exciting creative plans that are there to be seen and enjoyed. Another thought I take away is that media cannot be left to the market, that it needs funding, and that we should acknowledge the fact that there is more than ever opportunity for horizontal connections between people, and that the organization and power structures are no longer vertical or along the lines of the nation state. When it comes to EU policy, we have to be legitimate, trusted and credible. I think that is clear. That also means we have to be even more ambitious in mainstreaming expression, media freedom, journalism in our programs, and make sure that it's accessible, not only for the large, well-known organizations, but also for small, local organizations, for new players, for startups, for exciting new ideas. I think we have to be much more active in building local capacity, and that also means that if you have a funding application of 60 pages in English, that may not actually help accessibility. I fundamentally believe we have to build a strong digital agenda, revive the digital agenda perhaps, and make sure that the EU leverages its digital agenda or thinking about the open internet on the global stage. This relates to issues like internet governance and digital freedoms as elements of universal human rights. Our credibility is directly undermined if there is too much of a gap between what we do at home and what we tell otherwise, or when we say that we're going to do something and we don't. So that we have conditionality in, for example, trade agreements, and we actually never come back to it once the trade flows are going fine. I do believe that this Parliament has a particular role to play. Of course, we are aware of the real interests, whether they're strategic or economic or otherwise, but I think that in this House, and also as individual members, we have more freedom to address specific issues and to keep banging the drum for more respect for human rights, more attention for media freedom, etc. So I think that we are complementary in the EU institutions, but this Parliament has a particular role, not in the least because you all, with your diverse thoughts, are likely to find someone among the 750 members that sit here that you can roughly agree with and that can take on your interests specifically. So in closing, let's agree that this important agenda needs more work and that we are all too aware in Europe that our democracy is not perfect and that ideals require daily work. And I think we should be aware also of the sensitivities around working with people. It's very easy to say the EU should do more, the EU should do more, the EU should do more, but I've met all too many activists in various countries who are afraid to be associated with EU funding, afraid to be seen with EU politicians, and the fact that they are targeted probably also shows that there is some impact in what we're trying to do. But we should be aware of the sensitivities. So that's all I have to say. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely Human Rights Day.
Well, I cannot not conclude with special thanks to all of you, to Silvia Gonzalo, and to Maricha Schaake, who made all of this possible. Every time I see you on the floor of the Parliament speaking, I say there is the intelligence, conviction and courage we need to drive this agenda. Thank you very much.